Toya was an ordinary, underachieving loser in high school, trying his best to prepare for the national exams so he doesn't end up working at Mickey D's for the rest of his life. But while he's trying his best to stay focused and study, his classmates are busy goofing off and talking about a recent string of killings that have been happening in the city lately. Apparently, whenever a victim is killed, people have reported seeing petals in the area, so everyone is starting to think the petals might have something to do with the serial killer. But Toya couldn't care less about any of that. A few moments later, the homeroom teacher comes in and asks for the class's attention because he would like to introduce a new student to everyone. However, as he calls the new student in, she completely ignores the teacher and the rest of the class just so she can walk right up to Toya and introduce herself as Haido. Toya has no idea why this random girl is paying so much attention to him, but he knows better than to get himself involved with crazy main character stuff, and she looks like a textbook MC, so he gives her a half-assed response and turns back to his studying. The girl takes a seat next to Toya and doesn't say another word to him for the rest of the class. But after school is over for the day and Toya is on his way home, she comes looking for him and jumps onto the railing next to him. She then does a backflip even more unnecessary than the stuff Leon Kennedy does, and Toya is understandably confused because he still has no idea why this random transfer student is so interested in him. But before he can even finish that thought, Haido grabs his face and starts looking straight into his eyes. This freaks Toya out, so he pulls away from her and says he's got to go to cram school now before walking off. As he's leaving, Haido starts talking to someone named Neumann on her phone and tells them that she was right about the look in Toya's eyes. And that single sentence means Toya is officially wrapped up in the plot, so there's nothing he can do about it now. Meanwhile, in a dark alleyway somewhere in the city, a crazy man is attacking a woman with a butcher's knife, saying he's going to make a fine meal out of her. And this alleyway happens to be right around the corner from the cram school Toya goes to, so the plot is already not looking good for him. Toya is currently sitting on a bench outside his cram school, looking at his transcripts from his latest mock exam, and to be honest, it's not bad. He's got a 70% average, but that's nowhere near enough to get him anywhere in the Asian school system. He throws his transcripts away in frustration and just sits there, wishing that he had some kind of talent, literally anything, if it would mean he doesn't have to remain a useless bum for the rest of his life. But as much as he wants a talent, he knows they don't just fall from the sky, so he's not going to get anything by simply wishing for it. At the same time, back near that alley, 2 police officers have been called in to investigate because a few people reported hearing a woman's screams coming from that area. But so far, they haven't been able to find anything. Just then, they notice a man hunched over in the corner, and they assume he must just be really drunk, so one of the officers walks up to him to check if he's alright. But to the officer's horror, he soon realizes that this guy is eating the human remains of the woman from earlier, and he seems really proud of himself. The officer can immediately tell that this dude ain't right in the head, so he pulls his gun, fully prepared to pump him full of lead if he makes any sudden moves. A few moments later, Toya is walking home when he passes that very same alleyway, and the first thing he sees are the now decapitated bodies of those 2 officers, all while the crazy guy is standing there laughing his ass off. And sure enough, Toya has officially been roped into the plot. Just then, Haido shows up out of nowhere, and seeing the look on Toya's face, she asks him if he's feeling jealous right now. She says that when most people witness someone else's talent, they feel one of 3 emotions: awe, fear, or envy, and she assumes that someone like Toya, who has been so desperate to gain a talent, must be feeling pretty jealous right now. Toya is still having trouble wrapping his head around the whole situation and the fact that Haido somehow knew he was going to be here. But just then, the man notices both Toya and Haido seems to have a bit of a history with Fish. He says it's all thanks to Haido that he was able to awaken his talent, and that he is truly grateful to her. But as proof of his twisted sense of gratitude, he says he's going to do her the honor of turning her into his next meal. He then lunges at both Haido and Toya, but even though he was looking right at them, Haido still manages to grab Toya and hide behind a pillar, all before Fish's knife even hits the floor. Apparently, that little maneuver was all thanks to Newman's computational predictions, but Newman reminds Haido that she needs to take care of this as soon as possible. So Haido hands her phone over to Toya and asks him what he would do if there was an item that could allow you to gain the talents of your past lives instantly. That sounds like a dream come true for someone like Toya, but there's a catch. The item is this blade, and in order to gain the talent, you need to roleplay as a depressed emo teenager, so that's not exactly ideal. As Fish finally locates the 2 of them, Haido suddenly slashes her own neck, activating her past life talent as a kunoichi. As she does this, Toya notices flower petals pouring off of her, but before he can even ask about it, Fish attacks her, so Haido is forced to defend herself with her swords. While the fight is happening, Neumann talks to Toya through the phone and explains to him that through the branch of reincarnation, one can retrieve talents from their past lives, and those who have achieved reincarnation are called returners. As returners, both Fish and Haito are capable of performing superhuman feats, which is already pretty obvious, but Toya still has no idea what's up with the petals, so Neumann continues her explanation. She says that the petals are proof that someone has retrieved a talent from their former life. Even the most outstanding geniuses still die eventually, and when that happens, they are given a brand new life. But through reincarnation, it is possible for them to access their past skills. But just because someone was talented in their past life doesn't mean they were a good person, which is how you end up with people like Fish. Both good and bad alike are capable of awakening their past life talent, but there's also a chance that you were a talentless bum in your last life, in which case, attempting reincarnation will just kill you. That basically means that if Toya tries to use that thing, there's a good chance he might actually die, so Neumann asks him if he is still just as desperate to awaken a talent. She assumes Toya would get scared and refuse, but it turns out that she severely underestimated how insane he can be. Meanwhile, Haito is still fighting Fish, and Fish says he's disappointed because for someone who's supposed to have the talent of a legendary swordsman, her skills have been very underwhelming. Haito takes offense to that statement, so she decides to bust out one of her ultimate moves, the 8-hued corpse slash. At first, it looks like Fish is prepared for it since he manages to block one of Haito's slashes, but he forgets about the other 7, so a moment later, he is chopped to pieces, and the only thing left of him are his petals, which then scatter into the wind. Once Haito confirms that Fish is down, she goes back to pick up her blade, but then she notices that Toya is gone. She asks Neumann where he went, so Neumann explains that he took one of the reincarnation blades and ran off. Haito looks relieved because she was worried that Toya wouldn't have the guts to do it, but this is the exact outcome she was hoping for, and over in Toya's room, we see him drenched in blood after slicing his own neck. As he passes out, he has a vague dream about a mysterious white-haired man, and the next time he opens his eyes, it's already morning, and Haito is sitting in his room with him. He asks her what she's doing here, but then he sees his hand covered in dried blood, and that's when Haito tells him that he has successfully become a returner. He did do a lot of moaning and groaning in his sleep, though, so she asks him what that was all about. A little while later, Haito and Toya are sitting on a park bench, and Toya explains that he used to have an older brother who was good at everything. Everyone swarmed around him because he was a prodigy with a bright future, while Toya was left neglected because he was painfully and completely average. Everything he did was compared to Sia's exceptional performance, and just because Toya didn't win a gold medal in a foot race at 6 years old, his father called him a disappointment. Ever since then, Toya has been desperate to live up to the standard that Seiya had set, but for all the talents that Seiya had, he basically rolled a nat 1 on his health stat, so he eventually got sick and died. Toya's parents blamed him for Seiya's death for some reason, and that ended with him getting kicked out of the house, so he has been trying to get back at them by gaining a talent of his own to prove them wrong. Haito now understands why Toya was so desperate to get a talent, but desperate is an understatement because Toya literally tried every skill out there, and he was never any good at them. Haito says she understands how Toya feels because in a way, she's just like him. Toya is a bit confused by that statement, so he's about to ask her what she means by that, but before he could do so, she suddenly receives a message from Neumann asking her to come over. A few minutes later, they arrive in Neumann's room, and just by looking at the place, you can tell that Neumann has never touched grass before, mostly because she can't walk. Toya recognizes her voice as the one from the phone yesterday, and Haito asks Neumann where everyone else is because it's awfully empty here. Neumann explains that all the others are currently out on missions to defeat evil returners. After all, that is their main mission, here at the Forest of Greats. She explains that since evil returners are bound to pop up every now and then, it is their duty to eliminate them as soon as possible before they cause harm to the public like Fish did yesterday, and she expects Toya to join the fight. Toya seems very cooperative for someone who has just been told that he needs to kill other people, and on his first official assignment, he will be accompanied by Haito to take down an evil returner named Vlad. However, Neumann says she doesn't want them to kill him right away. That part is a little confusing for Haito, since killing evil returners is her job, but Neumann says she wants to gather some information on Vlad's talent, so they just need to keep him busy for 10 minutes, and after that, they can kill him. She also mentions that the mission will be on hold until 2 days from now because they still need to test out Toya's returner ability. So later that night, Toya heads out looking for an opportunity to use the ability. At one point, as he is walking down the street, he spots a burglar who had just stolen a girl's bag, and she is currently chasing after the thief. So Toya decides this is the perfect opportunity. Ironically, Toya's talent is called Right Arm of the Thief, and as expected, it's a stealing talent. So as the burglar runs past him, Toya is able to reach into the girl's bag and grab all her stuff for her. The thief then runs away, completely oblivious to the fact that the bag is now empty, and as the girl reaches Toya, she begins yelling at him for not stopping the thief when he had the chance. But then Toya tells her that there's no need to worry because he got all of her stuff out of the bag. The girl is thankful for his help at first, but then she remembers that it was a Birkin bag that was stolen, and the bag itself is worth way more than her stuff, so she continues chasing after the thief. Toya's ability has an effective range of 70 centimeters, which is a huge hindrance since it has no obvious combat capabilities to speak of. But if Toya somehow manages to get within range to activate his talent, he is able to break the laws of physics to steal anything he can get his hands on, regardless of physical obstructions. And its effectiveness isn't limited to just items either, because in that brief moment, Toya is also able to steal the blood out of the thief's veins, so he is currently collapsed on the floor. By all indications, this is a power that seems evil, but as long as Toya doesn't use it for bad purposes, then there's no problem. That said, that guy wasn't a returner, he was just a regular thief, so a death sentence for stealing a purse seems a little too extreme. 2 days later, it's time for the mission to eliminate Vlad, so Haido and Toya go out into the forest to fight him. Toya has to keep his distance, while Haido takes the lead since he doesn't have much combat experience. The initial goal here is just to keep Vlad busy for 10 minutes so Neumann can gather information on him, but his talent allows him to create countless sharp spikes from the ground, and that makes it difficult for Haido to stay safe while fighting him, so she eventually gets stabbed in the shoulder by Vlad. Haido is down for the count here, so even though the 10 minutes are almost up, Neumann gives up on trying to gather information on Vlad and tells Toya to get out of there before he gets killed as well. But Toya doesn't feel comfortable leaving Haido to die in a situation like this. Vlad is about to finish Haido off when all of a sudden, an arm reaches through his chest, which catches him off guard because there's supposed to be a stone wall behind him. It turns out that Toya used the stone wall as cover to reach into Vlad's body, and Vlad assumes he had intended to steal his heart, but because he's still unaccustomed to his ability, he misses the mark and ends up stealing nothing. Vlad mocks Toya for failing at such a clear opportunity for victory, and given the circumstances, there's no way that Vlad could lose to him now that he knows what his ability is, so Toya and Haido are pretty much doomed. However, just then, a dark aura fills the air, and a loud voice orders Vlad to withdraw immediately. Vlad tries to tell his boss that he was just about to finish off these brats, but his boss makes himself very clear that Vlad is to withdraw at once, so he reluctantly runs away, leaving Haido and Toya alive. Later on, Toya is standing alone by a bridge when all of a sudden, he is cornered by Vlad. Vlad demands that he return what he stole from him that day, and at first, Toya tries to play dumb and act like he has no idea what Vlad is talking about, but Vlad says he knows Toya must have stolen his talent. Back when Toya attacked Vlad, his target was Vlad's talent all along, and the fact that Vlad came here alone to try to get it back means that he must not have told anyone about it, which is perfect for Toya because he wants to keep his ability to steal talents a secret, and to ensure that it remains a secret, he activates his stolen ability and impales Vlad with his own spikes. Toya is no hero, and he has no interest in protecting humanity. All he cares about is gaining as many talents as possible, whether good or evil, so he can become the most talented person on the planet, and he's not going to let anyone get in his way. The next morning, Neumann calls to wake Haido up, and she's a little confused because from what she can see, it looks like Toya spent the whole night studying, and she didn't think he was the kind of person to continue putting in pointless effort even though he has already awakened a talent. Toya ignores Neumann's statement and asks her what's on the agenda for today. So Neumann informs him that he's going to hunt down an evil reincarnator, but before that, there's one stop she'd like him to make first. Neumann gives Toya directions to get to Haido's home because she's not answering her phone, and after walking in, Toya finds her half asleep and half dressed in the middle of her dojo. Neumann begins yelling at Haido for being so lazy, but Haido says she only slept in because she spent all night training her sword skills. Once again, Neumann can't understand why someone would bother training when the skills they already possess far surpass anything they could achieve through their own efforts. But be that as it may, Haido still enjoys practicing whenever she can. Anyway, today's target is a rogue clown named Hisoka who targets young children and lures them into the forest to become his victims. Before long, they enter the territory of the killer clown, and he attacks them on sight because he was expecting them to show up. Haido immediately activates her powers, and Hisoka assumes this will be easy, since all he needs to do is keep his distance and use his nen. But before he can do anything, Haido has already slashed his body in half, so the mission is already over. This is technically a success, but Newman is pissed that Haido took the clown out so easily when this was meant to be an opportunity to let Toya get some real combat experience. She apologizes for jumping in so quickly, but she just thought the clown looked like an easy target, so she couldn't help herself. However, it looks like Haido and Toya weren't the only ones who were after the clown because there was a whole strike team tailing him, and now that they've seen Haido take the clown down so easily, they decide to begin following her as well so they can figure out the secret of these petal spreaders. Later that night, Haito is hunting down another evil reincarnator, but all of a sudden, a bunch of apples drop in front of Gin, and a second later, he is forced to the ground by a tremendous force. Gin struggles a lot, but he eventually manages to slip out of the gravity field to continue running away, and the Newton reincarnator is really impressed that he managed to overcome that much gravity on his own. Since the guy is on the run again, it's up to the Einstein reincarnator to stop him, so she uses the theory of quantum mechanics to teleport right next to Gin, and then teleport his arm off his body. Once Einstein returns, Newton congratulates her on a job well done, but asks why she didn't just teleport the guy's head off to finish it quickly. However, she says killing targets is the soldier's job, so she didn't want to steal his thunder. Just then, Gin has a gun pressed against the back of his head and is ordered to surrender, but in that moment, he uses his other hand to grab a pair of scissors and slashes both of the soldier's eyes and neck. Gin is sure that should have been enough to kill the soldier, but a moment later, he gets shot in the chest because the soldier isn't an ordinary man, he's the undead soldier reincarnator, so he literally cannot die. And that's not all either. They also have Dr. Raisha, the replicator, and he has completely surrounded the alleyway with his clones, so there is nowhere for Gin to go, and a few moments later, Gin is executed. After the mission is complete, they all head back to base, where Newman congratulates them on a job well done. They hand over the branch they recovered from Gin, and then Nightingale comes over to ask if any of them got hurt in battle since she is the angel of healing. Funasaka could use a little recovery since he's still missing a few body parts, so Nightingale hugs him and starts licking his cheek to begin the healing process. She also whispers into his ear that she wishes he would take better care of his body because she hates seeing him get hurt, and she really seems to be enjoying her time with Funasaka, so the others just leave them alone. As for Toya, while the others were out on their mission, he was busy sorting through the tangled wires of Newman's setup, and Haito is surprised that he's willing to do chores like this even though he finally has the talent he was so desperate for. But Toya says he just happens to enjoy doing little tasks like this, and Newman is grateful for his help because she couldn't get anyone else to help her with it. Newton has heard a lot about Toya from Newman, so he's excited to finally meet him, and normally they would do a formal introduction, but everyone else is already doing their own thing, and Nightingale is still kissing Funasaka, so they'll have to put the intros on hold for now. Later that night, Toya and Haito are walking home together, but just then, Toya notices that the lights in his apartment are on, which is odd since he lives alone, so he and Haito head up with caution to figure out what's going on. Once they get inside, Toya finds an old friend of his, Itsuki, sitting in his room. Itsuki starts talking about how Toya looks exactly the same even though it has been ages since they last saw each other. And seeing that Itsuki is one of Toya's friends, Haito decides to introduce herself. Toya mentions that despite how he may look, Itsuki is actually exceptional when it comes to martial arts, so much so that he was hailed as a child prodigy right alongside Toya's brother. And he is currently the head of a special forces unit in the military. He's not a bad guy, but Toya thinks he's really annoying because he takes every chance he can get to brag about his achievements. After settling down, Toya asks Itsuki what he's doing here, so he explains that he heard that Toya had been skipping school a lot lately, so he was concerned that something might have happened to him. But it looks like he was worried for nothing because he assumes Toya has just been busy with his new girlfriend. He honestly didn't think Toya had it in him to bag such a pretty girlfriend, and even though Toya tries to explain that he's got it all wrong, Itsuki thinks he's just embarrassed, so he tells him there's no need to hide this kind of thing from him since they've known each other for so long. Hearing that gets Haito curious, so she asks just how long they've known each other, and Itsuki takes out a picture from several years ago to show her. The picture was of Itsuki, Toya, and Sia, and since the three of them spent so much time together back then, Itsuki views Toya as his own little brother now. He always thought Toya and Seiya made an adorable pair because Toya always did everything in his power to catch up to Seiya, and Seiya would often slow down a little so he wouldn't leave Toya behind. He wonders how Seiya would react if he were here to see that his younger brother got a girlfriend. Though now that he thinks about it, Seiya never really paid much attention to little details like that, not because he didn't want to, but rather because he never had the time to since he was so busy. It's what you would call the curse of the talented, but Toya probably wouldn't understand what he's talking about. Anyway, he doesn't want to take up any more of Toya's quality time with his girlfriend, so he says he's leaving now. But Toya can't stand the fact that Itsuki still thinks he's talentless, so he stops him and announces that he finally has a talent of his own. Toya then activates his powers, and rather than being shocked, Itsuki looks pissed because he already knew about the reincarnators and how they work, and he's disappointed to find out that Toya really is one of those losers who rely on power they didn't earn. Haido gets offended and yells at Itsuki to take that back while holding him at sword point, because she says he would never understand what people like her and Toya had to go through before getting these powers. However, Itsuki says that just sounds like excuses a useless loser would make. Hearing Itsuki call her useless sends Haito over the edge, so she attempts to slash him. But Itsuki's martial arts talents are no joke, so he easily evades her attack and knocks her feet out from under her before pinning her to the ground. He tells her she's lucky that she's Toya's girlfriend, because otherwise he wouldn't have taken it so easy on her after a stunt like that. And Toya can't even be upset about what happened because Haito did try to kill Itsuki just now. As Itsuki is leaving, Toya admits that using the reincarnator power was indeed a cheap shortcut, but he plans to use this power to gain talents of his own so he can one day surpass Seiya, and hearing that, Itsuki leaves without saying much. Outside, around the corner, a group of Special Forces units were lying in wait because the real reason for Itsuki's visit today was to confirm if Toya really was one of the reincarnators, but even though Toya had confirmed it, he still tells the unit to fall back because he doesn't want to hurt his friend. Dr. Yoshiki is disappointed to hear that Itsuki doesn't intend to capture those two because he was really hoping to get some new samples of the reincarnator petals, but Itsuki tells Yoshiki that he already has more than enough samples, so no one is allowed to engage here. Meanwhile, back in Toya's room, Haito is sulking in the corner because not only did she lose her cool, she also got absolutely manhandled even with her talent activated. Seeing Haito so depressed, Toya finally understands what she meant when she said she is really similar to him. She explains that before obtaining her talent, she was an ordinary useless girl. So useless, in fact, that she was abandoned at birth. She grew up in an orphanage, and kids who live in orphanages are pretty mean, so she was constantly bullied, especially since her hair was a different color. She cried herself to sleep every night, and the staff didn't care enough to do anything about it, so they all just pretended they didn't notice. However, one day, she was taken in by a kind man who took her to his dojo and promised to train her. Haito was happy to finally have a place to belong, but because the family was built on long-standing rules and traditions, there were many who were against the master taking her in, but he didn't care about their objections and took Haito in regardless. He gave her all the love and attention she could ever ask for, and Haito wanted to repay him by working hard to master the sword, but no matter how much she trained, she could never improve because she had no talent for the sword. She desperately wanted to gain talent so she could make her father proud, and that's when she heard a rumor that a branch of reincarnation could allow her to awaken a talent. She searched all over the place until she eventually found one and awakened the sword skills of Musashi. But in her excitement to show her father her talent, she went too far and nearly killed him. He managed to survive, but he was left crippled and unable to hold a sword ever again, so the dojo was shut down, and the family kicked her out for what she had done. She doesn't want to let things end this way, so she plans to make things right by becoming a full reincarnator and reopening the dojo for her father. But this is the first time Toya has heard of a full reincarnator, so he doesn't know what she's talking about. Meanwhile, Itsuki and Yoshiki are driving back to base, and Itsuki really wishes he could have skipped that reunion because he didn't mean to say all that stuff back there, but he really is disappointed that Toya ended up this way. And what makes it even worse is that all this is exactly what the prophecy they received talked about, so things will only go downhill from here. Back at Toya's house, he asks what a full reincarnator is supposed to be, and Newman chimes in to explain that everyone back at the Tree of Greats is a full reincarnator, except Toya and Haito. The main difference is that while Haito and Toya have a limit on how long they can use their abilities, the other full reincarnators have no cooldown at all and are always in their talented form. This state can be reached by using your talents more and more in battle until you simply don't return to normal, and despite how sketchy that sounds, that's exactly what Haito is aiming for, because the only way she'd be able to face her father again is if she were to go back as Musashi Miyamoto. Later that night, Toya calls Haito out to the school because he has something he wants to show her. First, he makes her turn her phone off so Newman won't be able to listen in, and once he's sure it's safe, he reveals that his talent allows him to steal the talents of others. Haito tells Toya she's impressed because his talent is really useful, but Toya asks her if she's sure she wants to be celebrating this, because in the pursuit of talent, he would no doubt target his friends if it was necessary. However, something like that doesn't bother Haito because she would do the exact same thing if she was in Toya's shoes. She's rooting for Toya to do the best he can, but she's also a little annoyed, so she pushes Toya against the wall and asks him why he hasn't tried to steal her talent yet. She knows the relationship wouldn't stop him from doing it if he wanted to, so it must mean that he thinks her talent isn't worth stealing, and she's totally right. She won't deny that her talent isn't great right now, but she swears that she is going to train it until Toya is forced to acknowledge that it is a great talent and try to steal it from her. Toya understands what she's trying to say, so he promises to amass a collection of talents worthy of rivaling her in the future, as the two of them have now formed a bond as rivals. Once Yoshiki and Itsuki make it back, they immediately confront the seer they captured because, as much as Itsuki hates to admit it, everything the seer prophesied came to pass, right down to Toya revealing his powers to Itsuki using one of those blades. Yoshiki has attempted to analyze the blade to see what it's made of, but so far, they haven't managed to come up with anything, which is why they plan to get the answers they want out of the seer, one way or another. The seer finds the threat of torture to be funny. While they may be a specialized black ops unit, especially Itsuki, who possesses talent on par with the greats of history, they are still no match for what's coming. After all, they are just humans bound by the laws of physics, unlike the reincarnators. He chose to let them capture him in the first place, so there's no way they could hold him against his will even if they wanted to, but he does agree to give them some information. First, he tells them that he's about to get up and walk out of this room completely unharmed, and second, that his king is going to bring back the calamities of old. As he says this, the chains binding his hands snap off, and all the soldiers immediately begin firing in an attempt to suppress him, but after the dust settles, he is still perfectly fine. Itsuki then lunges forward and slices the seer's arm clean off, mocking him for claiming he could make it out of here unharmed, but to his shock, the seer still has his arm attached to his body, as if nothing had happened, so he really was unharmed. The seer then casually walks away, but this time, Itsuki tells his men to leave him alone because it's clear that none of them will be able to stop him without casualties. The seer says that was a smart move because he pretty much saved the lives of his men, but before he leaves, Itsuki asks him to at least answer one question. He wants to know if, when the seer mentioned a king, he was referring to the leader of some kind of returner alliance. However, the seer tells him it's nothing like that. There are some returners who have formed some kind of alliance, like the Tree of Greats group, but in his case, he is simply a humble servant of the King of Returners. Meanwhile, back at the Tree of Greats, Newton is telling everyone about how he was nearly jumped by a second returner while carrying out an extermination. Newman asks if he can give her any details on what the returner's power was or what it could do, but Newton doesn't really know how to explain it. The best way he can describe it is that it was like a black fog of sorts, and upon hearing that, Haito and Toya realize that it must be the same guy who interfered in their battle against Vlad. Newman and Ein seem especially disturbed when they realize who it is, and a few moments later, just as Newton is about to ask what's wrong, the man himself appears on all the screens in the base. He cheerfully greets everyone there and mentions how wonderful it is that they have gained some new friends, but he's going to have to destroy this little gathering. Their motto is that those with talent are obligated to use it for the benefit of the world, and those who don't agree with that rule must be eliminated. But the king thinks that's an idiotic rule, because talent should be a thing of freedom that you can use any way you wish, which is why he is going to get rid of them, so he can move forward with his plan. After that, the king disappears, and Newton is left really confused because he doesn't understand what just happened. He asks Newman who that guy was, but she's too preoccupied to answer him because what just happened proves that the king really is the mastermind behind all the evil returner activity that's been going on lately. Ein is particularly upset because she can't believe the king managed to survive, but there's no denying it now. Newman explains to everyone that the returner they just met was the Tyrant King, Xiang Yu, and he possesses the strongest combat-oriented talent ever. In addition to that, he is also one of the founding members of the Forest of Greats. The others were never told this before now, but the Forest of Greats wasn't always as large as it is now. It used to only consist of 5 members, including Xiang Yu, and they had a leader who believed that talents should be used for the betterment of the world, which is why the mission of the Forest of Greats became centered around helping humanity. However, Xiang Yu was a king who thrived on tyranny, and he couldn't stand the boredom of helping people, so he betrayed the group and killed their leader. It was this act of betrayal that led Noman to believe that it is impossible to coexist with returners who possess evil talents since they inherently crave destruction. Therefore, they must be destroyed for the sake of humanity. Ein is boiling with rage because she thought she had killed Xiang Yu last time, and she swears she will finish him off for good the next time she sees him. But Newton tells her to calm down because that's a terrible idea. However, Ayn isn't in the mood to be calmed down, so she punches him across the face and tells him to shut up because he could never understand her. Newton really hates the fact that Ayn goes straight to punching when she's mad, but he tells her that he's not saying she should simply let Shang Yu go, he just means she shouldn't go in alone, because they've got a team of powerful returners who are all willing to help her. Newman also says she thinks they can win as long as they all work together, so they will hold an all-out battle to take Shang Yu out and hopefully wipe out the evil returners once and for all. They are set to head out soon, but before they leave, Newman calls Funisaka over and gives him a secret message. A week later, Newman manages to track down Xiang Yu's base, and the entire team is prepared to launch a surprise attack. Just then, the Julius Caesar returner comes running up to Haito, and he seems really attached to her, but Haito wants nothing to do with him, so she keeps dodging his advances. Caesar continues trying to get her attention. However, while he's still mid-pickup line, Haito is suddenly attacked, so she draws her swords and ends up in a stalemate with the swordsman Jubei. Jubei and Haito are actually really good friends, so this little duel is just a way of catching up and testing their skills against each other to make sure they haven't gotten rusty. Jubei then goes over to Toya to introduce herself to him, and Caesar does the same. But Toya really isn't interested in him at all, so he turns away to talk to Newman and Newton. He asks them why there are so many unfamiliar faces there, so Newton explains that the Forest of Greats has many members all over the world, but since this is such a big battle, Newman called them all back to participate. Toya is amazed because he never thought he would see so many historical talents in one place, but it seems like the members who were called back don't really want to be here. People like Charles Darwin think the evil returners are doomed to face destruction by their nature, so it would have been better to just take them out individually rather than have an all-out battle, and Bobby Fischer agrees, along with Schrödinger. Toya doesn't know much about these people, but he can tell that they don't seem like the kind of people who work well together as a team. However, that works out perfectly for him because he doesn't care about winning or losing. All he wants is to steal as many talents as possible amidst the chaos. Once everyone has settled down, Newman informs them all of the plan, and basically, they all have to attack along 3 predetermined paths. So Toya is trying to decide which route he should pick to maximize his talent hunt. But just then, Funisaka announces that he would like to pair up with Toya and Faber to head down the Earth path, and that throws a serious wrench in Toya's plan because he can't steal any skills without getting caught if he has teammates nearby. He asked Funisaka why he wants to pair up with someone like him of all people, and Funisaka simply says he has taken an interest in Toya recently, and Toya can't think of anything to say to weasel his way out of this without seeming suspicious. As the mission is about to start, they all gather by the front gate, and Newman warns everyone to be careful because they are going to be facing some of the strongest villains in all of history. Haito and Jubei are chosen to step up and lead the charge, and as Haito passes Toya, who is clearly still panicking over getting paired, she tells him she will be much stronger by the time he reaches the castle doors, that he will have no choice but to try to steal from her. After that, Jubei and Haito break down the front gate and charge in, so it's time for the rest of the team to join the action as well. The Wright sisters both fly into the air and carry one of Newman's satellites so she can begin running her calculations, and while she's doing that, the teams make their way into the compound. As Toya is running with Funisaka, Funisaka can tell that he seems upset about something, so he assumes that Toya must be worried about Haito. After all, those two seem pretty close, so it's natural to assume that they are a couple. Toya is caught off guard a bit by what Funisaka just said, but he clarifies that there's nothing special going on between him and Haito. However, on that note, he has been wondering if there's something going on between Funisaka and Nightingale, because things get really inappropriate whenever the two of them are together. But before Funisaka can even answer, Toya realizes that he made a fatal mistake, so he quickly takes back his question. So far, he has been taking extra special care not to get involved with the personal lives of any of the members of the Forest of Greats because he wouldn't want to get attached to them and hesitate when the time comes to steal their talent. But he nearly slipped up just now. A moment later, a giant hand reaches out of the forest and attempts to grab Toya, but Funisaka pulls him away to safety in time. However, while they might be safe for now, they are still going to have to fight that group, and the Strangler looks like he's going to be problematic to deal with. The other returners also seem to be facing similar challenges, but Newman isn't really worried because she's sure they can all handle it. Schrödinger is up against the Wild Bill returner, a sharpshooter from the Wild West, and he is easily able to shoot Schrödinger in the head to finish him off. However, a moment later, Schrödinger appears right behind him, and Bill doesn't understand what's going on because he's sure he shot Schrödinger a moment ago. Schrödinger confirms it as well, but by the nature of his ability, even though he was shot in the head, there was an alternate universe where he wasn't, so he simply shifted into that one instead. His power allows him to manipulate the probability of any outcome. For example, even though he's not particularly good at aiming with a gun, he can choose a reality where he manages to land a perfect headshot by pure luck, and when he does that, he can essentially never miss. As for Darwin, he is up against the Red Ripper, a returner whose claws can slice through anything. But the Ripper isn't the only one who possesses claws, because Darwin's ability allows him to evolve any traits or features necessary to win a fight, so beating the Ripper won't be a challenge for him. And likewise, Bobby Fischer and the others aren't struggling either. But Haito is starting to get annoyed because Jubei keeps stealing all the strong opponents before she gets a chance to fight. However, Toya and Funasaka aren't having it as easy as the rest of them because the Strangler is too tough for them to beat on their own. Just then, Funasaka tells Toya to keep moving and leave him behind, which surprises Toya quite a bit, but Funasaka says that all that matters is that they win the battle overall. He then takes out his gun and begins firing at the henchman before chucking a grenade at the Strangler. But the grenade doesn't do much as the Strangler tanks the blast and goes straight for Funasaka. However, at the last second, Toya jumps in to save him, and he's about to activate his ability, but just then the Strangler drops dead on the spot. Toya doesn't understand what just happened, so Funasaka explains that this was the work of Faber, the returner with the talent of stealth, and since he is able to block all perception of his movements, he was able to inject the Strangler with a deadly dose of poison to kill him. The second Toya hears that, he starts thinking to himself how great it would be if he could steal that talent for himself, but he'd have to figure out a way to catch an invisible talent holder off guard. At the same time, Funasaka calls Newman and asks her if she's sure she wants him to keep an eye on Toya, because Toya seems pretty trustworthy to him so far. But she has been suspicious of him for a while now because he seems overly interested in the talents of others, and he has been switching his phone off a lot to hide from her surveillance, so she thinks he might be working for Shang Yu. Meanwhile, in the clock tower, one of Shang Yu's subordinates, a sniper, is posted up and preparing to take out the Wright brothers to bring down Newman's satellite. But Noman had already thought ahead and posted a sniper of her own at a different location to take out Shang Yu's sniper. However, she didn't account for the fact that Shang Yu had already prepared a second sniper at a different location, so the twins get headshotted. And Noman looks on in horror as two of her companions meet a gruesome end. And the situation is only getting started because Shang Yu still has his 5 generals lying in wait to annihilate the Forest of Greats. Meanwhile, on Toya's end, Funasaka realizes that he has just lost contact with Noman, and while he is distracted, 2 attackers try to take him down. However, Toya steps in and uses Vlad's power to stop them, but Funasaka recognizes the power as one of the evil returner's abilities, and that makes him suspect that Toya really is a spy. Toya panics and tells Funasaka he isn't an enemy working for the evil reincarnators, and as he says this, to his surprise, Funasaka actually believes him and puts his gun down. Toya is relieved, but he doesn't understand why Funasaka would just take his word for it, but Funasaka simply says he isn't as analytical as Neiman is. While Toya may look really suspicious to him right now, and that he kept a part of his talent hidden, it's also true that he revealed his talent while trying to save him, and he would hate to ignore that act of kindness, so he is choosing to trust Toya. That said, he asks him to explain what's going on so he can understand the full story. A little while later, Toya explains everything to Funasaka, and Funasaka seems to understand it pretty well. Toya is collecting talents with the goal of surpassing his brother, Seiya, and he can understand why Toya would keep something like that hidden because Newman would blow a transistor if she found out about it. Funasaka then turns to Toya and tells him he has his support in his endeavor to collect talents, and this comes as a huge surprise to Toya. Funasaka then adds that of course he's not willing to give up his talent to Toya, but aside from that, he doesn't really care all that much because he has taken a liking to Toya. Toya still doesn't get why Funasaka is being so understanding, but Funasaka tells him they had better keep moving for now. Funasaka knows that humans are contradictory by nature, and though Toya may not have even realized this about himself, he is just as soft-hearted as he is greedy for talent. After all, he didn't hesitate to reveal his talent in order to save him or explain what was going on when asked. And that contradictory nature is proof that Toya is indeed still a human, so he couldn't possibly be a spy. Just then, Toya stops and asks Funasaka if there's a reason he chose to become a returner, and there probably was a reason. But Funasaka apologizes and tells him he wouldn't know what that reason was because he doesn't have any memories from when he was still a human. Meanwhile, over with Newman. After the Wright brothers were killed, the others immediately get into position to defend Newman because if she gets taken down, then the Forest of Greats is done for. One creates several clones and gets in front of Newman to form a human shield, but he gets mowed down immediately by heavy gunfire. And Haya realizes that there must be another sniper at work here. so she needs to take them out before they get Newman. At the same time, Toya and Funasaka finally make it to one of the castle gates, but just as they are about to make it through, the gate is suddenly blown up by one of the evil reincarnators. Toya manages to get out unscathed since he hid behind a piece of rubble, but Funasaka did get hurt, though it's not like it matters since he's immortal. The enemy then complains that Funasaka took so long to get here, and Funasaka tells Toya that he can sit this one out because he knows that guy only wants to fight him. After all, he is none other than Rudel the Phoenix. Meanwhile, Heiha has finally located the enemy sniper, so she activates her ability and draws him into her White Hell duel grounds. She is sure that it should be no problem to take this guy out. However, when she tries to take aim at him, she realizes she can't see him anymore. And a moment later, the man grabs the barrel of her sniper. He then casually gives her a few pointers, explaining that her barrel is way too long because it leaves her defenseless in close quarters battles, but Heiha had never been concerned about that because no sniper would ever get into a close quarters battle intentionally. Just then, she realizes that this man must be the legendary sniper, Hathcock, and even though Hathcock could finish the battle right here, he offers to give Heiha another chance. So he says he will move another 2,000 feet away so they can have a proper sniper duel. But before he leaves, Heiha calls out to him and asks why he is working with the evil reincarnators when he is a legendary hero, and Hathcock says she will understand after they complete their duel. Back on Toya and Funasaka's end, Toya asks why Rudel would be working with the evil reincarnators since he's supposed to be the renowned pilot of the Luftwaffe, and according to history, Rudel certainly wasn't evil. Just then, Rudel fires a shot at Funasaka, blowing off a portion of his face, but Funasaka returns fire and strikes Rudel in the face. However, just like Funasaka, Rudel's ability grants him immortality, and that's not all he can do. Rudel then drops a ton of bombs right on top of Funasaka, and Funasaka's body is blown to bits, but he regenerates a moment later so he can continue fighting. Rudel is intrigued that Funasaka's version of immortality works by self-regeneration, but Funasaka instead pulls out all the guns he's got in his arsenal, and Rudel does the same. Toya is currently staying hidden to keep himself from getting caught in the crossfire, and in theory, since both of them are immortal, they should be evenly matched. But the main problem here is the difference in firepower. Funasaka only has firearms and grenades at his disposal, but Rudel has a much more powerful machine gun, as well as his bomb rain, and it's keeping Funasaka from making any sort of progress. The only person who could potentially turn the tide in a situation like this is Fob, but Fob is currently lost in the forest because the navigators aren't working anymore. Just then, he happens to come across two evil returners sitting in the middle of the forest, and he thinks he might as well take them out since they can't defend themselves against someone they can't see. However, to his shock, the big guy charges right towards him, and he doesn't understand how this is possible since he should be completely hidden from detection. The person in the chair is Hitler, and he possesses the ability of Mastermind, which is why he has already deducted the abilities of all the members of the Forest of Greats. And as for how he knows where Fabre is, his ability hides all sounds and smells coming from Fabre's body, but since this forest is full of decay from Polt's ability, the lack of smell in Fabre's location gives him away, and with Fabre's primary advantage pretty much rendered useless, Polt proceeds to squish him into the ground. Meanwhile, Funasaka and Rudel are still fighting, and neither one of them has made much progress due to their respective immortalities, so Funasaka falls back and regroups with Toya. He tells Toya that there's nothing he can do here since Rudel's offensive capabilities are superior to his own, but Toya can tell that Funasaka seems to be enjoying himself. Funasaka doesn't deny that since this battle is pretty fun, but the way he sees it, there's no way they can win as things are now. Toya asks if it's going to be a stalemate then, but Funasaka tells Toya that there's a limit to how much a returner can use their abilities, even with something like immortality. So with Funasaka suffering most of the damage in this fight, it's only a matter of time before he hits his limit. Meanwhile, Heiha is still dueling Hathcock in her domain, and she's excited to finally have a decent challenge, but then she sees Hathcock come out from his cover with both arms raised. She can't believe what she's seeing because she never imagined that someone as skilled as Hathcock would surrender so suddenly, but Hathcock never intended to surrender in the first place. He was merely walking forward so he could get Heiha within the range of his one domain, and once he's close enough, it turns from nothing but snowy tundra to a snow-covered jungle. And this is where the real fun battle begins for both of them. Meanwhile, back in the forest, Newton and Ayn are walking together, but Ayn is absolutely terrified because she can't use her teleportation ability at all in this place. Just then, she hears a noise coming from the bushes nearby, so she clings onto Newton for dear life, but on a second glance, she realizes that it's just Darwin. However, Just as she is about to yell at him for jump-scaring her like that, Darwin collapses into a puddle of goo right before her eyes. Ain is about to scream in terror, but Newton covers her mouth because if there's someone in the forest strong enough to take out Darwin, then they are likely still nearby. And Newton was right about that because Hitler and Polt are right around the corner. Hitler thinks it was a bit conceited for Darwin to call his ability evolution when all it did was grant him the characteristics of pre-existing animals, so he wasn't very difficult to beat. But that aside, Hitler asks Schrödinger how long he intends to keep hiding behind that tree. Schrödinger has been here for a while now, but he hasn't made a move yet because every option he can think of has a 0% chance of success, so there's literally nothing he can do. He eventually gives up on trying to use his ability and just wings it, aiming his gun at Hitler. But that didn't work because Polt squishes and rots him into goo in an instant. Immediately after that, a sword is thrown at Polt, but he manages to catch it and rot it as well. The sword came from Bobby Fischer, and he's a little disappointed that his surprise attack didn't work on Polt since he was hoping to finish him off as soon as possible. Hitler knows all about Fischer and his ability to summon chess piece warriors, but hearing him say this catches Fischer off guard since he doesn't understand how Hitler could possibly know about his talent. And worse yet, Hitler has a perfect counter for every move Fischer makes because he knows what each and every piece does, so Polt is able to destroy them with ease. If this were an actual chess match, then Hitler admits that Fischer would have won, but in the real world, the strength of your piece matters just as much as your strategy. And Polt over here is way stronger than anything Fischer can create. Now that Polt has killed Fischer, Ain is really starting to panic because she can't think of a single way she could beat Hitler, especially since he just took out 3 powerful returners and seems to know everything about them. Newton can see that Ain isn't in the best state of mind right now, and judging from what they have seen Hitler do so far, Newton is sure that he must know they are here already, so he steps out and tells Ain that he will handle all the fighting for her. As soon as Polt has eyes on Newton, he plunges his fist into the ground, sending a wave of rot right towards Newton. Newton manages to leap into a tree to avoid getting dissolved, and he knows he said he was going to handle all the fighting, but he honestly can't think of any way to beat this guy right now. Just then, Polt somehow figures out where Newton is hiding, so he destroys the tree, and Newton is forced to go on the run. He doesn't understand how Polt was able to find him so quickly since that was a great hiding spot, but Hitler tells him that there's no point hiding because his mastermind ability is an all-knowing talent, which is exactly why he knows that Ain is hiding behind that tree over there, and that her ability is translocation, which allows her to move regions of space with herself inside to teleport. However, the fact that she hasn't teleported away yet means she can't use her ability right now, and the reason for that is because she is only able to teleport between locations that she has physically registered by walking there on foot. Hearing Hitler so accurately describe her talent sends shivers down Ain's spine, and Newton can tell that she is terrified right now. But just then, he notices a little weasel on the ground, and when he picks it up, he spots a symbol on its stomach, which reveals the truth behind Hitler's talent to him. With this info, he is able to blindside Polt just as he was about to grab Ain, and this gets Hitler's attention because there's no way Newton just randomly attacked from Polt's blind spot, so he must have realized the truth behind how this technique works. Basically, Newton figured out that this symbol he saw on the bottom of the weasel allowed Hitler to share his senses with it, and he placed these symbols all throughout the forest, which is how he was able to keep tabs on all the returners he has killed so far and figure out what their abilities were. And as for how he knew Ain's ability even though she never used it in the forest, Xiang Yu probably told Hitler all about it since he knew Ain back when he was part of the Forest of Greats. Hitler is impressed that Newton managed to figure out the truth behind his abilities so quickly, and he compliments Newton on how talented he is. But just because he has figured out the trick doesn't mean it changes their situation. After all, there's no way they can get rid of all of the marks that Hitler has placed throughout the forest, so their only choices are to either run away or die in battle against Polt. However, Newton still has one trick up his sleeve. Since he hasn't used his ability at all since he entered the forest, that means Hitler doesn't know what it does and hasn't made a counter-strategy for it yet, so as long as he can find an opening to attack, he still has a chance. Meanwhile, Rudel and Funisaka are still locked in combat, and Funisaka has figured out how to overcome the difference in firepower by simply catching and chucking Rudel's bombs back at him. But his regeneration is really starting to slow down after all the damage he has suffered. That said, Rudel is also starting to show signs of fatigue, so it's only a matter of time before one of them loses power first. And despite the threat of impending doom, both seem to be having the time of their lives because this is the most fun they've had in ages. The earliest memory Funisaka can recall is of him waking up as a returner, and he instinctively knew that a talent had been awakened within him, but as a trade-off, all his memories became fuzzy and blurred. However, he told himself that that was an insignificant price to pay for such power, and not much longer after that, he was inducted into the Forest of Greats, where Newman told him that he would work for the sake of humanity. And at first, he was overcome with emotion at the prospect of being given such a grand purpose. As such, he was sent to battlefields all across the world to fight, and with his talent, he was easily able to achieve things that no ordinary person would be capable of. But over time, he became bored because winning battles like these was way too easy for him. So he started to wonder if giving up his memories was really worth it for a bland existence like this. Back to the present, Funasaka has just had his arm blown off, and his regeneration is way slower than it used to be, so Toya runs out in front, trying to defend him, but Rudel tells Toya to stay out of this. However, strangely, Rudel doesn't shoot at Toya at all, and Toya thinks the reason behind it is more than Rudel wanting to keep the duel between him and Funasaka. He must have been given orders not to attack him for some reason, and Toya believes they can take advantage of that to win, so he tells Funasaka that they've still got a chance to win. Funasaka is still a little dazed, and he doesn't understand what Toya is talking about, but Toya tells him it means he doesn't have to fight to the death anymore. He is sure there must be something that Funasaka still has to live for, so he urges him not to give up on surviving. But hearing that, Funasaka now understands what his real purpose is, and it's not survival. He gets up and thanks Toya for his concern, but he tells him that there's no need for him to intervene anymore. He walks up to Rudel and thanks him for this opportunity because he finally understands what he has been missing all this time. He was never meant to be one of the greats, and he never cared about helping humanity. All he ever wanted to do was fight, because that's what he was made to do. And it's the same with Rudel. In fact, that's precisely the reason Rudel chose to go up against the Forest of Greats in the first place, because he knew he would get the chance to go up against someone like Funasaka. The only thing they are given is a talent, and that alone doesn't make anyone great. Most returners are simply fueled by the delusions of their names and are essentially LARPing to make up for their lost memories. Funasaka asks if Rudel knows what returners really are, but he's not entirely sure. All he knows for certain is that they are no longer human. After all, the people they used to be slit their throats in exchange for power and lost everything else in the process. They will never know what their former selves wanted to accomplish. But Toya is different because, unlike them, he still has his memories and original name intact. Rudel was given express orders from Xiang Yu to allow anyone who still has their original name to pass, and he even mentioned Toya specifically, though Rudel isn't sure why. The only thing he knows is that Toya is definitely still human, and that means he has a future beyond his talent. Meanwhile, Xiang Yu is watching over the battlefield with his ability, and he has just seen the conclusion of Hathcock and Heiha's duel. Hathcock ended up dying, but he also managed to take out Heiha in the process, so that takes care of their sniper. Meanwhile, Haito, Jubei, and Caesar have just arrived in the main area of the fort, but this place looks unnaturally empty. Haito can't believe this, since she was really looking forward to fighting some strong opponents here, so she goes to look around to see if she can find anyone. Caesar says he will go with her just to be safe, but Jubei smacks him on the head and tells him that won't be necessary because Haito is strong enough to handle herself. Caesar understands that, but he's surprised to hear Jubei call Haito strong, since he didn't think she would acknowledge someone like her as a rival. Jubei says that even a blind woman would be able to see Haito's strength, so her acknowledgement should come as no surprise, and since she feels that way, Caesar asks her who she thinks is stronger, her or Haito. Jubei says that if she and Haito fought, she may have some trouble, but overall, nah, she'd win. That said, she admits that if a fight between her and Haito were to drag out, then there's no guarantee that she'd be able to win. After all, Haito hasn't forgotten her original name yet, so she is still an incomplete returner, and that means she still has untapped potential. Caesar says he kind of likes Haito's original name better than her talent name, but Jubei believes the original name is worthless, and that Haito should hurry up and get rid of it already. That aside, she finds it odd that this place was meant to be a fort, since it looks a lot more like a coliseum, and that's when Caesar throws his dice on the ground to activate his power, summoning a sword and stabbing Jubei through the back. And as he does that, he tells her that the reason for the coliseum design was because it's perfect for killing. Back on Toya's end, before Funasaka and Rudel resume their battle, Funasaka asks Rudel if he can share a little info with him first. Their intel says that Xiang Yu has 5 generals, and Noman was suspecting that Toya might be a spy, but that isn't the case, so he wants to know who the spy was. Rudel admits that there was indeed a spy in the Forest of Greats, and it was the hero of Rome, Caesar, the most powerful of all the generals. The second Haito sees Jubei's lifeless body lying on the ground. She is filled with rage and demands to know why he would do such a thing. Honestly, Caesar thought that it would be a little more fun if he were the one doing the betraying this time, but it feels terrible for him. Heido charges at Caesar and tries to cut him down while he's distracted, but he easily blocks her attack and flings her away. Heido doesn't understand how he could best her in close combat when his sword is so long, but Caesar tells her that the length of his sword doesn't hinder him at all. Caesar is from the West, and unlike samurai, he is accustomed to the half-sword technique, where he grabs the blade of his sword and maneuvers it for easy close-quarters combat. Heido does her best to try and disarm him, but Caesar's mastery over his weapon is too great for that, so he ends up clubbing her into a wall. He tells her that there are countless ways for him to fight with a longsword, but he doesn't need to do all that because he has many other options to choose from. He then uses his ability to summon even more weapons, and each one comes with its own special attribute that Heido is ill-equipped to handle. He even snaps her sword in half at one point, and after knocking Heido to the ground, he pulls out an executioner's sword which strikes with enough power to tear through a large portion of the Colosseum. However, he didn't hit Heido because he was just trying to show her the extent of his power. His ability allows him to wield any weapon with perfect proficiency, and as a matter of fact, this isn't even his main talent. His main talent is actually a strategy type, so this is more of a sub-talent he just happens to have. Heido can't believe that someone as powerful as Caesar would choose to betray them, but Caesar says he was simply never on their side to begin with. He has been around even before the Forest of Greats was founded, and he has his own goals to work towards. He also recalls that Heido's goal was to fight strong opponents to grow stronger, so he tells her she had better step up her game unless she wants to end up like Jubei. But Heido is enraged by the sight of Caesar handling Jubei's body with such disrespect, and as her rage builds, her power begins to rise, which comes as a surprise to Caesar. But he's excited to see what an incomplete returner can really do. At the same time, Newton and Ein are still locked in battle against Hitler and Polt, and there's really not much they can do here, so they have simply been running away while taunting Polt every now and then. The idea is that since their only means of attack is Newton's power, they need to get within range to attack Polt, while also making sure they can get out of Polt's 6-meter decay range. They already know that Hitler is way too smart for them to trick, but Polt seems like someone who acts on impulse, so Newton figured that if they are able to make Polt lose his cool by insulting him, then that should mess up his teamwork with Hitler and leave him vulnerable to attack. Ein didn't think the plan would work at the time, but with the way things are going now, it looks like it actually is working because Polt hasn't been listening to any of Hitler's orders for a while now. Polt then throws a decay attack at Newton against Hitler's orders, and Newton thought this was the perfect opportunity to counterattack since he's already outside Polt's effective 6-meter range. But just then, Hitler starts laughing because Newton actually fell for his trap. The second Newton realizes that he has been tricked, he throws Ein to the side to save her from being decayed, and then just before the decay wave hits him, he uses his gravity field to bend the space around himself so he doesn't get hit. Hitler is impressed that Newton was able to think quickly enough to come up with a way to survive that attack, but there's nowhere left for him to run now. Hitler informs him that Polt's actual effective attack range is over 50 meters, so limiting his attacks to 6 meters earlier, and having Polt act like he had lost control, was all part of Hitler's plan. Newton apologizes to Ein and tells her that this is the end of the road for him, so she should get away while she still can. But Ein can't bear the thought of leaving Newton behind, so she teleports in front of him. And Hitler is surprised to see this because he didn't expect one of the so self-important greats to try and save another even though it's hopeless. Newton also tells her that this isn't a good idea since she's just going to get herself killed this way, but Ein is well aware of the risk, and she wouldn't be able to live with herself if she just abandoned him. Just then, Polt grabs Ein's shoulder, and normally, this would be where he disintegrates her, but instead, he just throws Ein against Newton, and then Hitler says he's willing to call this a draw. The two of them are left speechless because they don't know what Hitler's talking about, so he explains that it looks like Polt has decided to let the two of them live, and he personally has no means of killing them even if he wanted to, so they get to survive. Newton asks him if he's sure he wants to do that, since they'll definitely come after him in the future if he lets them go, but Hitler says that doesn't matter because he plans to die today anyway. This battle was always going to end with the annihilation of the evil returners, and he accepted that, which is why he simply intended to take out as many of Neumann's returners as possible. That's also why Hitler has no interest in killing the two of them, since the fact that they weren't delusionally confident in their talent and chose to protect each other shows that they still have a human side to them, so he tells them to cherish their remaining humanity. After that, Polt uses his power on both himself and Hitler, and as they are disintegrating, Hitler says he has one word of advice for Newton and Ein, so he tells them that they shouldn't believe everything Neumann tells them. After Hitler and Polt are gone, Newton and Ein head back to base camp, And there, they discover that Newman and Nightingale are the only ones left. Seeing that Newton and Ein are injured, Newman tells Nightingale to go heal them, and while Newton is being healed, he starts questioning Newman about this whole operation. Now that they think about it, it's hard to believe that Xiang Yu's organization exists with the goal of throwing the world into chaos like Newman told them, because if that were really his goal, he would have been able to achieve far more by simply splitting up his forces and sending them to different regions of the world rather than bringing them all here for a head-on confrontation. Newman refuses to answer their questions and instead tells them that they are being brainwashed by the enemy, but Newton isn't falling for it. He tells her that she had better start explaining what's really going on. Otherwise, he will have to force the truth out of her. But before he can do anything, Nightingale activates her secondary ability, and all of a sudden, Newton goes quiet. Newman then tells Newton that it's not very friendly to threaten her like that, and to Ein's surprise, Newton completely changes his tune and agrees with Newman now. Ein doesn't understand what's going on because she and Newton discussed what they'd do if Newman didn't reveal the truth before they got back, but now Newton is acting totally different. She soon realizes that Nightingale and Newman are the ones who did this to Newton, so she yells at them to undo it, but then Newton hits Ein with a gravity blast. Meanwhile, back on Toya's end, Funasaka and Rudol's battle has just ended, and even though Funasaka managed to come out on top, he's not going to last much longer. He has no regrets because that was the most fun he has had in a long time, but as his final wish, he asks Toya to take his talent. Toya says he can't do that, because even though he said he was willing to do whatever it takes to gain talent, he doesn't want to steal from Funasaka now that they are friends. However, Funasaka says he wants to entrust it to Toya regardless, because he deserves it more than anyone else he knows. Besides, Funasaka is going to die soon, so he would much rather have someone like Toya put his talent to good use, and hearing that, Toya reluctantly grants Funasaka's wish by stealing his talent. After that, Toya continues into the fortress, and to his surprise, he finds a castle surrounded by the graves of all the greats who have died. And inside, Toya comes face to face with Xiang Yu. Toya prepares to attack Xiang, so he activates his power, and Xiang is willing to entertain him for a bit, so he gets down from his throne and gears up for the battle. He throws a punch at Toya, but he manages to dodge out of the way, and Toya attempts to hit him with some spikes, but it turns out that it was just a clone. Xiang then takes control of the rubble and throws a bunch of rocks at Toya, which hit him head-on. Xiang's companion asks him if he's sure that's okay since she thought he was trying to take Toya alive, but Xiang is certain there's no way Toya would die from something like that. Just then, Toya launches a strike through the rocks, which strikes Xiang in the arm. Toya had used his thief ability to steal a portion of the rock's center and hid in the hole to avoid being hit. Xiang is impressed by how quickly Toya was able to think of a solution, but he tells him it's useless because his ability allows him to take control of anything around him, and he uses the power to take control of Toya's spikes, turning the tables on him altogether, and before Toya realizes it, he has been impaled through his heart. He falls to his knees in pain, but Xiang tells him to quit whining and heal himself already because he knows Toya has the immortality ability now. Toya is a little caught off guard by the fact that Xiang isn't trying to finish him off, and he's even more confused by the fact that Xiang just patiently waits there for him to heal himself. Xiang comments that it shouldn't be taking this long for immortality to heal Toya's body, so it looks like while Toya may be capable of stealing talents from others, the talents he gets are inferior versions, and Xiang finds that ironic because it reminds him a lot of Sia. Toya is shocked to hear Xiang mention Sia's name, so he asks him how he knows his brother, and Xiang explains that Sia was one of the founding members of the Forest of Greats alongside him, so they were pretty close. Toya asks if that means Sia was a returner, and Xiang confirms that. But he also mentions that Toya doesn't actually know who Sia was. All he knows about him comes from the few memories they shared in his childhood and the rumors he heard about him from others. So if Toya really wants to learn about who Sia was, then Xiang is willing to help him. Toya doesn't understand what Xiang is talking about, but in the very next moment, Xiang stabs him through the stomach, and he says he is going to show Toya everything he needs to know about Sia. Toya begins seeing visions of Seiya and the original members of the Tower of Greats, and Seiya had the returning ability of Leonardo da Vinci, Universal Vessel, making him capable of learning almost any other talent since da Vinci was known as a multi-talented genius, and as such, Newman was certain that one day, Seiya would surpass all of them in strength, making himself the greatest returner of all time or an outright god, an outcome she was greatly in favor of. At the time, even though all the returners had great talent at their disposal, none of them had any real goals, so they had just been living their lives in boredom. A little while later, Seiya asked Xiang to teleport him back home. which Xiang wasn't exactly thrilled about since he is required to cause physical harm to someone every time he uses his ability. For that reason, he had to scratch Seiya on the cheek to fulfill the conditions. But just as he was about to leave, Seiya asked him if he would like to stay and have a look around. Xiang initially refuses, since he says he has no interest in the affairs of ordinary people, and besides, he wouldn't want people to notice his petals. However, Seiya tells him that there's no need to worry about that because he learned a trick from Houdini to hide the petals, so no one should notice. Since that's the case, Xiang decides to stay after all, and a few moments later, one of Seiya's friends, Kitazuka, comes over for Seiya's usual practice that day. He introduces Xiang to Kitazuka, and Kitazuka finds him interesting, but he doesn't have any time to talk because he's itching to get started with practice. While he and Seiya were sparring, Xiang stood off to the side to watch, and while he was standing there, he notices a young Toya hiding in the bushes nearby. He picks him up and asks what he's doing there, but Toya turns it around on him and accuses Xiang of being a trespasser. Xiang explains that he came there with Seiya's permission, so he isn't a trespasser, and little Toya explains that he's just there to watch Seiya practice because he wants to be just like him in the future. Xiang tells him that if he's trying to become like Seiya, then he shouldn't bother because no one can live up to someone like him. But Toya takes this as Xiang calling him useless, so he yells at him and runs off. Xiang really didn't mean it like that, but he also doesn't know how to explain to Toya that his brother is no longer human, so he decides to just leave things as they are. A little while later, Seiya is back at Xiang's hideout, and they have been training together for a while now, but while Seiya still wants to keep going, Xiang throws a towel on his head and tells him to take a break. While they are resting, Xiang asks Seiya what reason he has for always pushing himself so hard to train. He wants to know if he has some sort of goal he is working towards, because if it's something like taking over the world, then Xiang wants in on the plan since that's what his ability is best for. Seiya bursts out laughing, and Xiang yells at him for being disrespectful. But Seiya says he was just caught off guard because he simply wasn't expecting him to say something like that. Since Xiang wants to know about Seiya's motivation, he explains that he has a little brother who really looks up to him. And Seiya has been feeling guilty about it because all the talent that he is looked up to for was essentially given to him by the petals without him having to put in any work. That's why he wants to work as hard as he can to gain new talents so he can at least try to make the world a better place. That way, he may one day have the courage to face Toya and tell him the entire truth. Xiang is a little disappointed that Seiya's goal is so boring, but he asks what kind of good Seiya is trying to accomplish, and Seiya thinks for a moment before responding with world peace, and Xiang thinks that is a hilariously ambitious goal, but he's willing to help him out, and he manages to get the others on board with the idea as well. But Noman doesn't really want to participate because she says she doesn't like wasting energy on tasks with no real solution. If it were world domination, then it would be a lot more feasible because all she'd need to do is kill off anyone who resists. But something like world peace is difficult to quantify because things like famine, discrimination, and war can't simply be fixed by force, and there are countless examples of those problems in the world, so even with Newman's superintelligence, she has no idea where to start. Xiang cuts her off and asks if she's just scared that she's not capable of such a feat, because if so, she doesn't have to push herself, but that, coming from him, is the worst insult Noman has ever suffered, so purely out of pride, she agrees to join the mission just to prove a point. Since the whole idea was originally Seiya's, Xiang tells him that he should decide their first move, because with all of them working together, there should be nothing they can't accomplish. And that was how the Forest of Greats was founded. After that, Xiang went out to recruit other returners, and he eventually tracked down a group of returners, including Hitler and the other sinners. He told them all about the goal of world peace that he and the others are working towards, but Hitler takes it the wrong way and assumes that Xiang must be there because he wants to take them out for the sake of his world peace. After all of them have historically had a hand in creating chaos. Darman tried to tell everyone that Xiang is just trying to help, but tensions are already high, and the others seem convinced that this is going to turn into an all-out fight. Just then, Xiang smacks both Hitler and Darman over the head and tells them to stop causing such a fuss. He explains that the Forest of Greats stands for returners who wish to do great things, so it doesn't matter who they are or what their talent may be. He is willing to accept them regardless. Hitler is surprised to hear him say that, but he reminds Xiang that there are some returners who are greatly influenced by their talent, so they may be led to commit crimes if their talent's history is bad. But Xiang was already aware of that, and promises to deal with any rogue returners personally. A little while later, Xiang returns to the new Forest of Greats base, and he's surprised to see a bunch of new faces there. But Seiya explains that they are all greats that Newman convinced to join the cause, and Shang is glad to see all the support they are getting, but there's something he wanted to talk to Seiya about. He asked Seiya if he would be willing to accept returners even if they don't have great pasts, so to speak, and he was a little nervous about how Seiya would respond to the question, but to his relief, Seiya said he'd be happy to accept anyone who wants to join the cause. That's how the Forest of Greats came to be, and the only reason it was so successful was because Seiya was there to keep them all together, both Great and Sinner class returners alike. However, that all changed when, one day, Seiya and the others called an emergency meeting, but when Shang arrived, he noticed that Seiya didn't look so good. Seiya told him he had decided on what the first goal of the Forest of Greats would be, and he said he planned to eradicate all Sinner class returners, but Shang really didn't take that well and flared up in anger because this wasn't part of the deal. The others explained that Toya was recently attacked, and based on Newman's analysis, she determined that it was the work of a sinner. Xiang can understand why Seiya would be upset, but Xiang tells him that there are still plenty of Sinner class returners who are perfectly harmless. However, Seiya says that according to Newman's calculations, the chance of sinners committing crimes like this again is extremely high, and normal people have no way of defending themselves. If that's how Seiya truly feels, then Shang drops to his knees and tells Seiya to start by killing him. Seiya hesitates when he hears him say that, but seeing him hesitate just makes Shang even more angry because it shows that Seiya lacks any real conviction. If he's so sure that all Sinner class returners need to be eradicated, then the fact that they are friends shouldn't matter to him. Xiang tells Seiya that he has plenty of friends who are sinners, and he isn't going to just stand by and watch them be killed. So this means war, and as he says that, he drives his fist through Seiya's chest. The others go wide-eyed when they see what Shang has done, especially Ain, who immediately tries to take him out, but Shang manages to avoid a fatal hit, and in that moment, he notices that Newman has a sinister smile on her face, almost like she planned this whole thing. The group is about to attack Shang again to take him out, but before they could do that, Seiya teleports Shang away. Shang doesn't understand why Seiya would save his life after all he said, and that's when Seiya apologizes and tells Shang he was right about eradication being a bad idea. Shang now realizes that Seiya simply wasn't thinking clearly when he said all that stuff, and it makes sense because Seiya's whole reason for doing this was to make Toya proud of him. So seeing Toya injured likely clouded his judgment. It would have been nice to figure that out before things escalated, but it's too late now because Seiya is already dead. Back to the present. Toya has just seen the full story, and he thanks Xiang for showing him because it puts his mind at ease to know that his brother was a returner and not some unfathomable genius. Xiang is a little surprised that that's all Toya has to say after learning the truth, but there's something else he wanted to tell him. He tells Toya that he has to stop Newman because she is definitely up to something. She may have agreed to the world peace plan back then, but that was likely a cover for her real motive. And that's likely why she wanted to get rid of all the sinners in the first place, to remove any potential obstacles to her plan. Just then, Caesar arrives in the hall with Yagyu on his shoulders, and he asks Xiang to make sure she doesn't die for him because Haido is chasing after him, and she's not the same anymore. Toya can't believe that that thing is really Haido, but Xiang tells him that she was willing to give up anything in exchange for power, and that's what turned her into this monstrosity. Toya asks if there's any way to save her, but Xiang is already way ahead of him and says he is going to turn her back into a human whether she wants to or not. Nas tells Xiang that fighting Haito head-on isn't going to be easy, but he was already aware of that, which is why he plans to use his trump card. However, it's going to require some preparation, so he asks Caesar to help him hold Haito off for a little bit. And while he's doing that, Xiang tells Toya and Darmont to take a few steps back so they don't get caught in the crossfire. Caesar prepares two swords to clash against Haito, but with her tenfold strike power, she is easily able to shatter his swords after their first clash. Caesar realizes that he doesn't stand a chance against her in swordsmanship anymore, so he switches to defense and pulls out a shield to block her attacks. However, Haito simply ups her attack multiplier and hits him with a 1,000-fold strike, shattering his shield. Now, Caesar is really out of options, but when Haito moves to slash him down, for some reason, all her strikes keep missing, and the one behind it is Nas. His ability allows him to not only predict the future through his prophecy book, but also make small amendments to change the future. Of course, he can't go full reality warper, but if it's something like changing the trajectory of Haito's sword to avoid a fatal blow, that much he can manage. Unfortunately, that only works because Caesar actually has strength comparable to Haito's, so the odds of him dodging her attacks are decent. However, Nas has very little athletic ability, so when Haito targets him instead, his book turns black because there is literally no possible way for him to dodge, and shortly thereafter, Nas gets slashed in half and meets his end. and without Nas there to boost Caesar's odds of survival, he too meets his end as Haido stabs him countless times. However, Caesar did manage to succeed in stalling her for long enough to buy Xiang the time he needed, so when Haido turns her attention toward him, he activates his domain, trapping her in a field of darkness and completely immobilizing her. He assures Haido that he's not going to take her life, but she'd probably prefer a quick death compared to what she's about to experience, and after he says that, he begins tearing Haido's body apart atom by atom. Meanwhile, outside the barrier, all Toya and Darmon see is a black sphere, and Toya has no idea what's going on. So Darmon explains that this is Xiang's trump card, Black Death. It is a domain in which Xiang controls everything down to the molecular level, so it is literally impossible to defeat him once you are inside. Hearing this, Toya gets worried because there's no way Haito could survive something like that, and Darmon tries to assure him that Haito will be fine because Xiang doesn't intend to kill her. But before she can finish her sentence, Toya has already used his ability to reach into the sphere in an attempt to steal Haito out of it. Meanwhile, inside the sphere, Xiang is currently putting Haito's body back together, and to make sure she doesn't consider giving her sense of self up again in the pursuit of power, Xiang makes her see a vision of her father, and he asks her if the power was really worth it. Now that Haito thinks back on the promise she made with Toya, she realizes that it was a mistake. Xiang is satisfied after she comes to that realization, so he fades out to let Toya grab Haito, and once the domain has been dispelled, she is back in one piece in Toya's arms, albeit with a few scars. Darmon asks if this means it's finally over, but Xiang tells her the real battle is actually just beginning. Meanwhile, over in the Defense Force lab, Itsuki and the others are still busy trying to analyze the branch of reincarnation they found, but so far, they've had no luck tracing its origins. All of a sudden, Toya appears on the floor out of nowhere, and he asks Itsuki for help because these two need immediate medical attention. Normally, this would constitute a security breach, and Toya and the others would be locked up for questioning, but Itsuki tells the guards to just let it go and get the medic, since he trusts that Toya isn't here for any bad reasons. However, Itsuki can't say the same about Xiang. Xiang tells him to calm down and assures him that he isn't here to pick a fight. He just came to ask for help because Itsuki and his team have a really good track record when it comes to capturing and eliminating returners. Xiang would love to sit and chat for a bit first, but unfortunately, they don't have much time because he says the enemy is on the move. Itsuki asks what Xiang means by the enemy, but before he can explain further, all the computers in the building and across the world get hijacked, and a message from Nomen begins to play. She addresses all the humans of the world and tells them that she's the leader of the Forest of Greats, and she is currently working toward the goal of world peace. However, to achieve her goal, she has decided that it is necessary to get rid of all Sinner-class returners by eliminating them, and by proxy, that means humanity needs to die as well. After all, any human has the potential to become a Sinner-class returner. For this reason, she plans to have everyone undergo the reincarnation ritual by slitting their throats with a branch of reincarnation, and if they happen to awaken a great class talent, then Newman will gladly welcome them into the Forest of Greats. But on the flip side, if they awaken a Sinner-class talent, they will be executed on the spot. And if they happen to not awaken a talent at all, well, tough luck buddy, they just slit their throat for nothing. Through her plan, the world will be filled with nothing but greats, and just in case the people of the world aren't taking her seriously, Nightingale has prepared a little demonstration of the power possessed by the Forest of Greats. She pulls up a screen, and it cuts to Alfred Nobel in the middle of Australia, and once he gets the signal, he activates his talent to create an annihilation bomb. And just like that, Australia is wiped off the map. At the same time, Tesla receives the signal to make his move as well, so he charges up his ability and proceeds to blow a hole straight through Mount Everest, but that's not where Newman's demonstration ends. The screen then cuts to Gagarin in low orbit with his satellite, and he proceeds to launch several kinetic bombardments down at Earth, causing severe damage all across the globe. Newman then addresses all the humans of the world again and tells them that this is only a fraction of the power they possess, because they haven't even busted out Heisenberg yet, but she assures them that they don't need to worry because the plan won't commence until the 1st of January next year, so humanity has 3 months to make peace before they either become greats or die. Once the transmission is over, Xiang destroys every single computer in the room, and when Itsuki asks why he did that, he explains that Newman was spying on them through the screens. Her true ability is Cyber Mastermind, which allows her to completely utilize any and all computers however she wants. Toya is shocked to hear that since he thought Newman's ability was just computational prediction, but Xiang explains to him that it is possible for a returner to have more than one ability at their disposal. Itsuki asks why Shang is acting so calm when he's one of the sinners that Noman wants to eradicate, but Shang says he's not going to be around much longer because his body isn't going to hold out much longer. He's pretty sure that Noman only decided to make her move now because she knew he wouldn't be around to fight her. And meanwhile, back at the Forest of Greats, Newman is talking about how her calculations were spot on because Shang should be croaking any minute now. Newton says it was a close call, since if Shang and the other returners he had on his side had attempted a last-ditch attack, it would have been impossible to stop them. But Noman says she actually accounted for that as well. Just then, all the heavy-hitter returners she had on her roster come out of the shadows, and Newman says she has them on standby in case Shang really did try to attack. That makes sense to Newton, but it's also a bit confusing since he could have sworn that Noble was in Australia just a moment ago on Noman's live stream. But Noman explains that she just had him teleport back. Hearing the word teleport gives Newton a splitting headache because he remembers that was Ain's ability, so he asks Newman what happened to her, and Newman informs Newton that he disposed of Ain with his own 2 hands. In fact, he was so thorough that all that was left of her was a foot, and hearing that sends Newton into hysteria because he can't believe he really did that to Ain. Seeing Newton's reaction, Newman assumes the hypnosis Nightingale cast on him is starting to wear off, so Nightingale begins walking over to him to redo it. Newton demands to know what they did to him, and since Nightingale is going to rehypnotize him anyway, Newman explains that Nightingale actually has a secondary talent called enslavement. It comes from the part of her story where the soldiers she treated were so grateful to her that they'd do anything she asked, which is why now she is able to enslave anyone she uses her healing powers on. Newton can't believe they would actually use an ability like that to make him kill Ain, but Newman says Ain wouldn't have needed to die if she had just accepted the enslavement and joined their side. Newton asks if this means Newman was the reason Seiya was killed as well, and Newman doesn't deny it, so Newton tries to rally all the others to help him stop her. However, he soon realizes that they are all already under Nightingale's control, because during Newman's time here, she had made sure that every single injured member of the Forest of Greats was healed by Nightingale at some point in preparation for this moment. Newton can't believe Newman really wants to go through with all this, and he asks her if Seiya's dream of world peace was really just a joke to her. But as he says that to her, he sees tears streaming down Newman's face, and that's when he realizes what's really going on here. Newman is being controlled as well. Enslavement must work by actively warping the target's thoughts to make them believe they want to follow the orders given to them, but when someone is forced to do something they are fundamentally against, the subconscious tries to fight back, resulting in the target crying without knowing why. All this means that the real mastermind behind this whole genocidal plot must be Nightingale. Meanwhile, back at the Defense Force base, Shang has also come to the conclusion that Noman isn't the real mastermind, and that someone must be controlling her along with everyone else at the Forest of Greats. That means they are up against a completely unified force, but there's a silver lining to it because that also means they just need to take out the mastermind to stop all this. However, Itsuki interrupts him and says he doesn't care about all the boring details involved in this whole Returner war. The only reason he started looking into the whole Returner thing in the first place was because he was looking for clues about a particular murder. Shang can already see where this is going, so he comes right out and tells Itsuki that he was the one who killed Seiya, and the second he confirms that, Itsuki attempts to take him out, but Darmont gets in front of him, and Toya tells Itsuki to wait. He explains that both Shang and Seiya were tricked into fighting each other, so it's not entirely his fault, and Itsuki is still level-headed enough to understand that, so he agrees to let his grudge go for now so they can save the world. But he has no idea how they are going to beat this mastermind. Xiang then speaks up and says he has a plan for that, because it should be easy for Toya to win if he steals his ability. Omni Receptacle has the ability to control the entire world when fully utilized, so defeating the mastermind should be easy with it, and Shang will have finally achieved his goal of surpassing Seiya. However, Toya rejects the offer outright. He says he already gave up on surpassing Seiya after learning the truth about him, and while it's true that Xiang's ability could solve all their problems by putting the world under his control, even Shang himself chose not to use it to conquer the world, so Toya doesn't plan to either. Shang asks him if he's sure about that since it's going to be very difficult to win without his ability, and Toya says he has already made up his mind, so Shang decides to leave the rest to him. As a final parting gift, he gives them all the research Caesar conducted on the Forest of Greats and the Petals, and after that, both he and Darmont vanish. Shang and Darmont soon appear in the beautiful field where all the other returner graves are kept, and since they are going to die soon, Shang at least wanted to be able to choose their final resting place, and Darmont tells him that's an awfully romantic gesture on his part. She then takes out a dagger and stabs herself in the chest. The day Shang first met Darmon, she had just woken up beside his creek, so he walked over and asked her what her ability was. Darmon explained that she is able to kill anyone she chooses in exchange for her life, and she's already thinking about who she should take out, but Xiang told her that was a lame way to use her power. Darmon asked him what she should do instead then, since that's the only use her power has, but Shang tells her that her power has a special use. By nature, people are doomed to die in solitude, but her power allows her to bind her death to another person's, and that's something incredibly special. So he told her that she should find someone special to spend her life with, so when the time comes, she can share her final moments with them. And D'Armont took real inspiration from Xiang's words, so ever since that day, she stayed by his side. And now that Shang's death is approaching, she chooses to use her ability on him so the two of them can die together. And as they both dissolve into petals, they share a kiss, vowing to find each other if they ever reincarnate. A little while later, Haido is taken to the infirmary for treatment, and Toya has been waiting by her side the entire time. Itsuki comes over to check on him after a while, and even though Haido's the one in critical condition, Toya is the one who looks terrible right now because of all the stress he has been under. Toya asks Itsuki if Yagyu is doing alright, so he informs him that she is currently in the ICU because her injuries were quite severe, but she will be able to make a full recovery. Toya is glad to hear that, and he is sure that Itsuki must have quite a few questions for him. And he's right about that because they started analyzing the data that Shang Yu left behind about the petals of reincarnation and the returners, so they'd like to go over what they've learned so far with Toya. They then head over to the auditorium so they can begin the debrief, but before that, Toya actually has a question he'd like to ask Itsuki. He has heard that Itsuki works for the Special Division of the National Defense Force, but he's not sure about the details. Minami is about to explain the whole thing to him, but Itsuki cuts him off mid-sentence and tells him not to say too much. He then tells Toya that he can't reveal all the details right now, but all he needs to know is that they have been investigating the returners for a long time, and the higher-ups are preparing for an all-out war with the Forest of Greats. And right now, all he wants is for Toya to answer a few questions so he can determine whether he can be trusted or not. Minami tells Itsuki that there's no need to be so rude, but Toya says it's not a problem. That said, he has noticed that Itsuki has been a lot less friendly towards him ever since this whole mess started. Anyway, it's time to go over what they know, and since there's a significant risk of Newman spying on them through their devices, they are limited to using devices with no internet or transmission capabilities. Not having internet access is a huge blow to their battle planning, but they are going to have to make do with what they have. According to what Noman said, the Forest of Greats will enact their plan in 3 months, and even though Shang said that everyone, including Noman, was being controlled against their will, they don't really know who is doing the controlling. So no matter how they look at it, humanity is doomed to perish in 3 months' time unless they can crush the Forest of Greats before that. However, their overwhelming power is a major concern. In the demonstration they made, they easily took out at least 200 million people, and they need to find some way to counteract their firepower if they want to stand a chance. The first one on the list is Noble, and Toya doesn't really have much info on him since this was the first time he had ever seen him use his ability. However, considering the life of the real Alfred Nobel, Noble's power is likely called the Merchant of Death, allowing him to control and detonate bombs at will. But those bombs seem more akin to antimatter than regular dynamite with their destructive capabilities, and what's even more concerning is the fact that even though Nobel was at the epicenter of the blast, he wasn't harmed at all. Next on the list was Tesla, and his ability is a bit more straightforward, since he just creates incredibly powerful blasts of electricity. But Gagarin is a real problem because he is capable of performing precision orbital strikes from outer space, and his range covers the entire globe, so nowhere on the planet is safe from him. And that's only a fraction of their combat power, so it looks like humanity really is doomed, and Minami starts freaking out, but Itsuki smacks him on the head to calm him down and reminds him that there's still time to come up with a strategy. Before Itsuki leaves, Toya calls out to him and asks if there's anything he can do to help. Minami can already think of a few ways that Toya can be of assistance, but Itsuki yells that he doesn't need Toya's help at all. Both Toya and Minami are confused, since Toya is without a doubt one of their biggest assets, but Itsuki insists that Toya's help isn't welcome, because victory would mean nothing for humanity if they had to rely on the help of a returner to achieve it. He also tells Toya that from here on out, he is forbidden from leaving his hospital room, and that if he makes any suspicious moves, he will be branded an enemy, and the explosive wristband Itsuki placed on him will explode. He also warns him that trying to take off the wristband will cause it to explode instantly, but that doesn't deter Toya at all, so he immediately takes it off, and the wristband does blow up, leaving him with severe wounds. However, Thanks to the immortality talent he stole from Funasaka, he heals in a matter of seconds. Itsuki realizes that the bomb wasn't much of a threat to Toya, but he also has one around Haido's neck, and he warns Toya that if he doesn't stay put, then Haido will have her head blown off. Toya doesn't understand why Itsuki is doing all this, but Itsuki simply says this war will never end until either the humans or returners are wiped out completely, and he already has methods developed to deal with returners. The methods Itsuki mentioned are a series of mech suits powered by the branches of reincarnation to grant soldiers a significant power boost without turning them into returners, and he is currently sparring with the soldiers as training. The soldiers ask him if he really thinks it's a good idea to spar without putting on one of the suits as well, but Itsuki says he doesn't need it, and to prove his point, he slams one of the mech soldiers into the ground before he can even react. Itsuki's skill still far outweighs that of the other soldiers, even with their mech suits, but he knows this kind of strength isn't going to be enough to defeat the returners. In truth, the only reason he chose to reject Toya's offer to help was because of his attitude. Toya was being way too optimistic about the situation, so much so that it reminded Itsuki exactly of Seiya. In this war, an ordinary returner isn't going to be enough to stop the Forest of Greats. What they need is the power of a ruthless conqueror, so he is trying to push Toya to that point. Meanwhile, Toya is sitting by Haido's bedside, wondering what he should do in this situation. He wonders if he was being too naive because he genuinely believed that he could work together with the others and save everyone, but now, he is starting to spiral because he doesn't know what he's supposed to do now. However, just as he is on the verge of a complete breakdown, he remembers something Neumann had said to him a while ago. She had confronted him about the fact that he frequently turns his phone off so she can't spy on him, but she didn't actually seem all that upset about it at the time. She said she understood his need for privacy, but she asked him to do her a small favor and to avoid turning his phone on outside her garden unless he's in serious trouble. Toya didn't understand what she meant at the time, but now that he thinks about it, Neumann's garden is pretty much anywhere she can get a connection to the device, and since Itsuki sealed off all external connections to this place, then that means he is outside her garden right now, so he turns on his phone to see what happens. And to his surprise, an AI model Neumann created begins loading onto his flip phone. Once the AI is fully loaded, Neumann pops up on Toya's screen, and the first thing she says is that he looks awful with those dark rings under his eyes, which sounds a lot like what Neumann would say before she was brainwashed. Toya is relieved to have the normal Neumann back, but to be exact, Neumann explains that she isn't the original. She is a duplicate that was created with all the same memories and thought patterns as the original, so she could function in cases of emergencies, so she says Toya can call her Neumann 2. Neumann 2 was installed on all the phones of the members of the Forest of Greats as a precaution in case of emergencies, and she is surprised that Toya was the first one to figure out the activation mechanism, but he says it was just a coincidence. Since Xiang fried all the base's external connections, it became completely cut off from Neumann's network, which is what allowed Toya to trigger the activation in the first place. But moving on. Neumann doesn't have a good grasp on the situation because Haido seems critically injured, and they are in a building she doesn't recognize, so she asks Toya to tell her what happened. Toya takes some time to explain everything that has transpired, and after analyzing the situation, Neumann 2 informs Toya that this was all likely the work of Nightingale. She most likely has full control over the entirety of the Forest of Greats, including the original Neumann, and Toya is absolutely shocked because he never would have suspected Nightingale of having an ability to control the people she has healed. Neumann 2 also suspects that the original Neumann fell under Nightingale's control after recruiting her, because she had sliced her own finger to give Nightingale a chance to demonstrate her abilities, and though she had no reason to suspect Nightingale at the time, that was a real blunder in retrospect. However, Neumann 2 says there's still hope, because the original hasn't completely fallen under Nightingale's control yet. After all, when she first recruited Toya, she acted as though she didn't know who he was, even though there's no way she didn't recognize him as Seiya's brother, and she was also the first person to stand up for him when the others were giving him a hard time because of his talent. Toya asks if this also means that the 3-month deadline was the original Neumann's way of giving them a chance to stop Nightingale's plan, and that's exactly what it looks like since, realistically, the 3-month deadline has no benefit for the Forest of Greats. If Nightingale had been the one making the announcement, she probably would have just given the order to attack immediately. But since she has to give her orders through Neumann, Neumann is able to interfere, even if it's only a little. Toya feels really relieved after learning all of this because it feels a lot better knowing that he isn't fighting alone, but Neumann 2 reminds him that the situation is still pretty bad. The original Neumann is still under the control of Nightingale, and Neumann 2's computing power is greatly limited by the fact that she's running off Toya's flip phone right now. That said, she is still a proud genius AI, so Toya can rest easy knowing that she's on his side. While all that was happening, Itsuki receives a report from one of his men informing him that all the world governments are currently mobilizing their forces in an attempt to track down the Forest of Greats, and they have already begun eliminating people whom they think are suspicious, and several bounties have been placed on the returners' heads. But Itsuki knows the returners aren't the sort of people who can be found so easily, though there's not much else for them to do at the moment, so Minami suggests they should start looking as well. Shortly thereafter, multiple sightings of returners all throughout the world are confirmed all at once, and some encounters have already led to battles which didn't end well for the humans. One squad is backed into a corner in the forest, so they decide to form a three-point defense to cover each other while they wait for backup. However, a second later, two of the men vanish, and the last one left comes face-to-face with a terrifying returner. Back at the base, Noman asks Toya how Haito is doing, but Toya doesn't really know how to answer that because there's nothing physically wrong with Haito's body and her breathing is stable, but she just won't wake up for some reason. Newman suggests Toya should try kissing her to see if that will wake her up, and Toya can't believe Newman would be making jokes at a time like this, but she says she was being completely serious. There is scientific evidence that external stimulus can help a patient wake up from a coma, especially when it's from a loved one, so she thought it was at least worth giving it a try. However, Toya isn't willing to do that, since even if it does work, how is he going to explain himself when Haito wakes up? Just then, Toya hears Haito grumbling in disappointment because she was actually a little curious about what a kiss would feel like. But Toya mentally skips right over that part because all that matters to him right now is the fact that Haito is finally awake. Haito runs up to Toya and hugs him, which comes as a huge surprise to Toya, so he asks her what she's doing. Haito says that her memories are still a little fuzzy, but she remembers Toya saving her from the darkness, and she's very grateful for that. Just then, Toya hears a commotion outside, and it sounds pretty serious, so he tells Haito to stay here and rest up a bit while he goes to check it out, but the second he's gone, Haito's true form starts to slip out again. As Toya is walking down the halls, Norman tells him his reaction back there was a bit underwhelming since she was expecting a more romantic reunion between the two, but Toya has never really considered Haito as a love interest, so the thought didn't even cross his mind. He eventually finds Itsuki and a group of scientists standing around a soldier, and he finds out that the soldiers had been sent out to investigate places where returners had previously appeared. Out of the original 10 members of the squad, this guy is the only one who managed to make it back. Toya doesn't understand how this could be happening since the Forest of Greats already said they aren't going to make their move for another 3 months, but Norman believes that the returners that were encountered weren't actually members of the Forest of Greats. Minami overhears Noman talking from Toya's phone and asks what that is, so Toya explains everything about Noman's backup program, and Noman goes on to explain that not all returners were part of the Forest of Greats or Xiang's army, and they had been mostly quiet before now. But the declaration of war likely spurred them into acting out on their own since they believe this is going to become a world run by returners. As for the soldiers who disappeared, all the survivor recalls is that it was a returner in a cloak who did it, and as he is being taken to the infirmary, Toya happens to notice a piece of cloth with a symbol fall off him. Itsuki and Minami have also seen that cloth scattered around places in the city, and it looks a bit like someone trying to imitate Noman's eye design, but Itsuki has no idea who it could be. However, Toya, on the other hand, actually has a theory in mind, so he asks Itsuki if he can let him handle this one on his own. He explains that he believes Itsuki's men are still alive out there, and they were likely captured as hostages, so they can still be saved because whoever did this is actually after Toya. A little while later, Toya heads back to his house, while Itsuki and a few others are posted on a nearby rooftop to provide sniper support if Toya is in danger. Neun asks Toya how he knows that this returner is going to show up here in the first place, and he mentions that, for one, there's one of those markings placed here as well, and two, he already knows who the returner is, because it turns out that it's Ain. Back when Newton was ordered to kill Ain, he was able to regain control of himself just in time to redirect his attack so it only hit Ain's foot. He told her to hurry up and get out of there because he didn't know how long he would be able to remain in control, and Ain tried asking him to come with her, but as much as he wanted to, he couldn't risk doing that because he was still under Nightingale's control, and there was no guarantee that he wouldn't attack Ain again even if he escaped with her, so he chose to stay behind for her safety. Back in the present, Ain wakes up in Itsuki's base, and as soon as Haito realizes she's awake, she runs over to hug her because she's so glad to see Ain again. Toya reminds Haito that she should probably give Ain some space since she just woke up, and in the meantime, he says he's going to go get the doctor. Haido tells Ain she has been asleep ever since they brought her in yesterday, and though the doctors said she wasn't in critical condition. Haido couldn't help but worry considering how exhausted Ain must have been, plus the current state of her leg. Hearing that reminds Ain of the injury she suffered, so she looks down, and yep, her leg is still gone. She had kind of accepted what happened back there, but it still all feels like a bad nightmare. She says she could really use some cheering up, so she asks for some cuddle time with Haido, but Newman too chimes in and reminds her that before that, they need to think of a plan of action. Ain realizes that Newman is right and apologizes for getting distracted, but then she realizes that it's Newman, and she is not happy to see her, so she immediately grabs the phone and attempts to smash it while the others try to stop her. After a little while, they finally manage to calm Ain down enough to explain the whole Newman 2 situation to her, and Ain thinks it makes sense since this Newman does seem a little different from the other one. Newman 2 says that's natural since she technically is a separate entity, therefore she is bound to have differences from the original. But that aside, Newman 2 is curious as to why Ain chose to use such a roundabout method to contact them, but Ain says that was just to ensure that the original Newman didn't catch on to what she was doing. The others don't quite understand what she means, so Ain explains that Newman is great when it comes to analyzing data, but she sucks at deciphering the meaning behind images, so by using a symbol like that, there was no way Newman would ever figure it out. Ain left those symbols at locations where she believed those who hadn't been hypnotized would see them, but Toya was the only person to respond, so she can only assume that, including Jubei, they are the only returners who aren't under Newman's control. Haido says that just means they need to work together to stop Nightingale no matter what. But while Newman likes that they are motivated, she asks if Haido actually has a plan on how to accomplish that. But Haido isn't too sure about that. To start with, Newman says they need to decide on a leader for the group, and Ain thinks Newman should do it since she's the smartest in the group. But Newman tells her she's just an AI running on a flip phone right now, so the best she can do is provide counsel. As for who she thinks should be the leader, Newman suggests the title should fall to Toya since he was the one who discovered her activation conditions, and he was the one who deciphered Ain's message as well. Ain doesn't like the idea of letting Toya be the leader since she hasn't interacted with him much, but the others say they would be happy to follow his lead, so Toya officially becomes the team's leader. Toya doesn't seem all too confident about the idea of leading this team, but since everyone has so much faith in him, he agrees to do it. However, he tells them they are going to have to give him some time to come up with a proper plan, and Newman offers to help, so he puts her in his pocket. While Toya is walking down the hall, Minami comes up to him and asks if he is interested in finding out about the true nature of the petals of reincarnation, but Toya doesn't really care about that, so he turns him down. Minami rephrases the statement and tells Toya that they may have found a way to take out the Forest of Greats along with all the other returners, and that sounds pretty important. Toya agrees to go with Minami, and when he arrives at the lab, Minami explains that he apparently smashed some branches of reincarnation at one point. Toya is shocked to hear that since he thought those things were practically indestructible, and Minami confirms that they pretty much are. When they were first recovered, he initially tried crushing, exploding, and burning the branches, but nothing seemed to work, and in a moment of frustration, Minami grabbed 2 branches and threw them on the floor. By chance, the 2 branches happened to strike each other, and when that happened, they both shattered into dozens of tiny little pieces and turned into petals. Minami then repeated the same action with another pair of branches, and the same thing happened again. This confirmed to him that the branches could indeed be destroyed, but the question of how the branches actually work still remained. At first, Minami thought the branches might hold infinite energy, which is what allows the returners to use their physics-bending talents, but upon further investigation, he discovered that wherever returners fought, the surrounding matter would always end up losing its integrity, and that led him to believe that the returners must be getting the energy for their talents from the matter itself. If that's the case, then maybe the petals that are spread around are what allow the returners to gather the necessary energy in the first place. Toya asks what any of this has to do with Minami's plan to defeat the Forest of Greats, so Minami asks Toya if he has ever wondered where the petals disappeared afterward. While they were holding Nostradamus, he left them with a prophecy, stating that the petals have their flower, the flower has its branch, and the branch has a tree, but it all came from a single seed, and if they can find whatever this seed is, then they may be able to take out the returners once and for all. To that end, Minami asks Newman where she found the branches that were kept by the Forest of Greats, and Newman says all of those were just collected from the sinners they killed. Minami is disappointed to hear that since he was hoping she would know whoever is creating all of them, but Newman had never even considered the idea that the branches might have been created by someone. They don't know for sure if there's someone making the branches or if they just occur naturally, but if they can get to the core of reincarnation and destroy it, that should get rid of all the returners. However, To do that, they'd need to run more tests with the branches of reincarnation, and they currently only have 2 left, which is nowhere near enough. Thus, Itsuki plans to hunt down the rogue returners and take their branches of reincarnation so they can perform tests on those as well. Newman tells him that a plan like that is reckless, since even if those rogue returners aren't as organized as the Forest of Greats, they are still returners. So there's no way Itsuki's men will be able to defeat them, but he's already well aware of that, which is why he intends to send Toya and the others out to defeat them instead. Toya is shocked by Itsuki's brazen demand and asks him if he really thinks they'd just put their lives at risk like that. But Itsuki reminds him that he still has bombs around the necks of his friends, so this isn't really a request. Newman says they might as well just start digging their graves now, because a mission like this will inevitably lead to their deaths. But that's exactly the point. Itsuki says it has come down to either humanity or the returners, and considering everything Toya has been through, he is sure he must understand which is more important. Toya is a little conflicted, but he ends up agreeing to go along with the plan. However, when he relays that to the team, Haito can't believe it. She refuses to accept that Toya expects them to eradicate all returners, including themselves, with this plan. She asks why they can't just take out Nightingale and save all their friends. He can't seriously expect them to just kill everyone when he knows firsthand that they all have their own goals and aspirations. Ain wants to believe that Toya is just pretending to go along with Itsuki's plan to buy time to come up with a different plan, but Toya tells her that's not the case. He looks dead inside as he says this, but he tells them that he really is serious about exterminating all returners because, after gaining talent, he realized that the ordinary frightened humans didn't sign up for any of this and were dragged into it through no fault of their own. So all the blame rests squarely on the heads of the returners, and the only way to fix things is to get rid of all the returners, including themselves. He isn't going to try to justify this morally since this was a tough decision for him, but he now believes that talent like this is meaningless. And hearing him say those words really hurts Haito because she thought if anyone would understand her obsessive need for talent, it would be Toya. Yet now he's standing here telling her to throw it all away. She slaps Toya across the face for breaking his promise to her, and in a fit of rage, she activates her powers. Meanwhile, in the training room, Itsuki is letting off some steam by pummeling the practice dummies, and Minami can tell that he's in a foul mood. So he asks if it's because he feels bad about what he did to Toya. Itsuki admits that Minami is right, and Minami tells him he should feel bad because guilting Toya into getting his hands dirty was an awful thing to do. Then again, it's not like they had much of a choice in the matter when the stakes are so high. But Itsuki can't help but wonder if it would be better to just throw in the towel, rather than put Toya through all of this, especially after everything he has been through as a kid. Itsuki then asks Minami how things are going with the Black Ops team, and he is informed that, surprisingly, none of them objected to working with Toya and his friends, since Toya did manage to save the people that Ain kidnapped, and if the Black Ops team is on board, then the operation should go off without any issues. However, just then, a big issue arises as the building begins to shake because Haito just tore a hole in the wall. She tells Toya that she refuses to give up on her dream of becoming a swordsman, so she is going to do things her way from now on, and then she jumps out the window. As Haito leaves, Ain grabs Toya and tells him to go after her. But Toya doesn't see what good that would do since Haito already made her choice. Newman chimes in and tells Toya that his stance is indeed the most logical solution, but this isn't about being right or wrong. It's about Toya's complete lack of consideration for Haito's feelings on the matter. She reminds him they are no longer strangers to one another, especially him and Haito, so his words hurt her more than he realized. Toya understands that, but he has no idea what to say to Haito at this point to make things right, but Ain doesn't care. She just throws him out and tells him not to come back until he has figured out how to make up with Haito. A few moments later, Itsuki and Minami come rushing in to see what happened, and Minami is horrified to see the giant hole in the wall. He begins panicking because he thinks the base has been exposed, but Itsuki reminds him that the base is currently tucked under a cave, so there's no way they could be spotted from there. That aside, he wants to know what happened here, and Noman offers to explain. But first, Jubei interjects and asks Minami if he has any way to track Haito's location, and as a matter of fact, he does. He pulls up a laptop that shows that Haito is heading toward the coast, and that's all Jubei needed to hear. So she immediately transforms and says she is going to assist Toya with finding her. Meanwhile, over in the Forest of Greats, due to the hole in the wall, Newman One was able to pick up on the fact that Ain is still alive, and she is forced to relay that information to Nightingale, who has some sinister plans in mind. As for Haito, she soon arrives at the coast, and she is just standing there thinking about everything that led up to this point when, all of a sudden, a man appears behind her. He says he is surprised that she is still incomplete this late in the game, But Hado has no idea what he is talking about since she has never met him before. The man says that reaction is natural since everyone who meets him ends up losing their memory of him. Haito doesn't want to take any chances, so she immediately attacks him when he starts approaching. But surprisingly, he shrugs it off with no visible damage, aside from the fact that his face is crumbling off. However, that doesn't seem to bother him, so he goes on to introduce himself as Alan Smith and tells Haito that he wants to have a little chat with her. Back at the base, the team is trying to figure out which rogue returners they should target first, and the first on the list is Napoleon. However, Napoleon has an ability that allows him to bring the dead back to life to fight for him, and he is currently hunkered down right on top of a mass grave, so he has an unlimited supply of soldiers to resurrect. For that reason, they decide that going after him would be too difficult right now. The next returner on the list is Rachel Carson, and her ability is also very difficult to deal with because she operates exclusively in the water. That puts them at a severe disadvantage since they'd have to go into her turf if they want to do battle. And on top of that, Ayn isn't particularly good at teleporting in the ocean, so her powers wouldn't be able to help. The remaining options are the returners who were spotted around the clock tower, and Ayn seems eager to get out there and fight. But Newman tells her it isn't going to be that simple, because these two are Laplace and Maxwell, and their abilities basically grant them molecular perception, so it would be impossible to sneak up on them unless they want to be found. Ayn is starting to get frustrated because each one of these returners seems practically impossible to beat, but Menami tells her to calm down because he has a plan in mind. Ayn is worried about Haito, but right now her top priority is to track down the seed, because if it really is the heart of all returners, then if humanity gets its hands on it, all returners will be eliminated, but if the Forest of Greats gets its hands on it, then humanity will be doomed. Ayn doesn't want either situation to happen, which is why she wants to become a third party by stealing the seed for herself, and that way, she'll be able to arbitrate and force both sides to leave each other alone. She believes this is the right thing to do because it's what Newton would have wanted her to do, and as she thinks this, she is reminded of the last words Newton spoke to her before he was taken over. She then starts thinking about the day she and Newton first met. She hated the fact that she got paired with a guy like him, but Newton was always nothing but upbeat and cheerful. There's still a lot that Ayn hasn't gotten to talk to Newton about, and she wants to get the situation under control before she sees him again. Just then, Itsuki asks Ayn how far she can teleport, so she informs him that she can teleport anywhere in the world as long as she has marked the location, and she says she has already marked all the major cities on the planet, so it shouldn't be hard for her to get to the rogue returners. Minami writes down his plan on the board and tells everyone that first, they will teleport to the target, then they will defeat the target and obtain the branches of reincarnation for further study. Ayn doesn't think that's much of a plan, especially if Minami really believes the Black Ops team can even help take down a returner. She tells him to just sit back and let her handle it, but Itsuki tells her that isn't an option right now. Ayn is still badly injured, and due to those injuries, even one teleport will leave her exhausted, so there's no way she'd be able to handle it all on her own. Furthermore, he says this battle is predominantly for humanity's sake, which is why he and his men need to fight. Sure, some may die, but that's a sacrifice they are all prepared to make since they need combat experience against returners. Plus, they won't actually be going in without backup, and to show Ayn what he is talking about, he calls for the secondary team to come in. Ayn is surprised to see a bunch of returners burst in through the door, and Itsuki explains that these guys are returners whom they had managed to capture before Shang Yu's death, and they absolutely refused to say anything before this. But after Shang's passing, they became completely cooperative, almost like Shang had sent them here to be captured on purpose, so they could serve as reinforcements when the time comes. However, among the returners, there also seems to be a strange old man nearby, and none of the returners know who he is, which puts them all on edge. Meanwhile, out in the forest, Toya and Jubei are still out looking for Haito, and they are almost out of the forest now. So if they keep following Haito's trail, they are bound to end up at the coast. But just then, Jubei senses someone nearby and immediately goes into a battle stance before yelling for them to show themselves if they don't want to be cut down. A few moments later, Alan Smith emerges from behind a tree, but he tells Jubei to calm down because he didn't come here to fight. At the same time, over in the Forest of Greats, Einstein is bored out of her mind because there's nothing for her to do. Nightingale asks why she didn't go after Ayn like she said she would, but Einstein already tried that and it didn't go very well, and it's all Ayn's fault. Tesla guesses that Newman must have given Einstein false information since her deep subconscious isn't fully under Nightingale's control yet, and he honestly thinks it's quite impressive how much she is resisting. That said, Tesla is also feeling really bored since he hasn't gotten a chance to do much of anything lately. He asks Nightingale if they can just enact the plan ahead of schedule, since he's more than ready for it. But Nightingale tells him he's going to have to be patient because she likes how things are going so far. With the declaration they made, a bunch of nations are busy fighting amongst themselves, accusing each other of siding with the returners, and she loves all the panic it is creating. Just then, Alan Smith leans on Einstein's head and tells her he's pretty bored as well, but just like everyone else. Einstein has never seen this dude before in her life, so she reflexively attacks, and Alan jumps out of the way. The others then prepare for a fight, thinking an intruder has snuck his way into the Forest of Greats, but Nightingale, on the other hand, bursts out in laughter. She is so excited to see him that she accidentally releases her crystals, which is really dangerous since a single touch from one of them could kill a person. Once Nightingale has regained her composure, she apologizes to everyone for her outburst and gets rid of the crystals, but she explains that she was just so excited that she couldn't contain herself. She then turns to the guest and asks him what his name is, to which Alan gladly introduces himself. As Alan Smith appears before everyone simultaneously, he tells them that he is the creator of the branches of reincarnation. The others can hardly believe what he just said, but Itsuki tells the guards to stand down, since if what Alan said is legit, then that means he is the key. Alan says the power of reincarnation was a gift, but it looks like his gift was too strong for humanity to handle because now they are here plotting how to destroy the branches. He thinks it's a shame, but Alan says he is going to respect their wishes and asks if they have any final words they'd like to say. Meanwhile, in the forest, on Toya and Jubei's end, they have just heard Alan tell them that he is the creator of the branches of reincarnation, but Jubei refuses to believe him and tells Toya they need to keep moving because that man is obviously lying to them. Toya tells Jubei to wait because he doesn't think the dude is lying, and just then, Alan appears in front of Jubei again, telling her that he isn't lying and that nothing is unknown to him. Like the fact that Jubei is still slightly tormented by the betrayal of her friend or the throbbing in her right eye, and this sets Jubei off, so she takes off her eye patch and lashes out at Alan. At the same time, over in the Forest of Greats, after Alan introduces himself, the other returners are a bit puzzled because they've never heard a name like that before, so they ask Nightingale how she knows him. But Nightingale has never actually met Alan before. In fact, it is practically impossible to become acquainted with him by his very nature, but Nightingale had hypothesized that someone like him had to exist. After all, despite there being so many returners, no one has ever found out when returners first started appearing. And the fact that returners pop up all across the world means there must be someone distributing the branches of reincarnation, and that someone is Alan. Back on Itsuki's end, he asks one of his men to toss him a knife, and then he points it at Alan, telling him that if he came here to talk, then he had better start right now. Itsuki asks him if the seed is real, and Alan tells him that it most certainly is real, and he even offers to show it to him. In the next second, Itsuki finds himself in a pitch-black room where he turns around to find a black seed floating in the air with dozens of branches of reincarnation growing from it. This is exactly the kind of confirmation that Itsuki was hoping for, but his gut tells him it's not going to be easy to recall the details from this vision, and he needs to find a way to etch this into his memory, so he decides to stab himself in the hand to make sure he doesn't forget. Meanwhile, on Toya's end, after Jubei attacked Alan, he dropped his briefcase, and it turns out to be full of branches of reincarnation. Toya tells Jubei to wait and put her sword away, and Jubei is surprised that Toya actually believes that Alan is the creator of the branches of reincarnation, but from what they've seen so far, it seems pretty likely that he's telling the truth, and it's the best lead they've got. Toya has been trying to stay mostly positive about the situation so far, but the truth is that everything could fall apart in an instant if Nightingale just decides to commence her plan a little early. However, if they could get some inside information from the creator of the branches himself, then maybe they might stand a chance. Jubei realizes that Toya is right, and if this man truly does know everything, then maybe he can show her the reason she decided to become a returner in the first place. Alan thinks it's a bit greedy of her to want those memories back after she already threw them away, but since she asked nicely, he's going to give her what she wants. In an instant, Jubei finds herself in a pitch-black space where memories of her life before becoming a returner begin to play. It turns out that she was originally part of the same dojo as Haido, and the hatred that drove her to become a returner was the fact that Haido killed their master using the power she gained after becoming one. Sometime later, Toya finds Jubei passed out on the ground, so he rushes over to check on her, but now that he thinks about it, he doesn't really remember what they've been doing for the past hour. The same thing happens with the people back at the base since they barely remember what happened, all except Itsuki, who managed to hold on to the memory of the seed of reincarnation thanks to the pain from stabbing his hand. Unfortunately, Toya had no such luck because he can vaguely remember meeting a strange man who was supposedly all-knowing, and that he asked the man for a way out of this mess, which the man answered, but he can't remember what the solution was. As for Haido, after her encounter with Alan, she ends up wandering back over to the dojo and collapsing on the floor there. Nightingale's memories of her interaction with Alan are also erased, but the fact that she has no memory of the last hour confirms to her that her hypothesis about someone like Alan existing is correct, and that her plan will go off without a hitch. Anyway, she says it's time for her hibernation, and she warns the others to stay away from Ian and the others since there's something she's a little concerned about. Back in the forest, Jubei finally wakes up, and Toya is relieved to see that she's okay. Toya tells her he contacted Itsuki and the others, and they said something about confirming the existence of the seed and meeting a faceless man, but he doesn't really understand it. Jubei is surprised to hear him say that and asks if he doesn't remember speaking to Alan a moment ago, but Toya has no recollection of what happened at this point. Jubei, on the other hand, still remembers everything, and she believes Alan must have left her memories intact because he wants her to confront Haito, so that's exactly what she plans to do. She leads Toya through the forest until they end up at the old dojo, and inside, they find Haito. Toya is glad to see that Haito is alive, though he doesn't really know if she's okay since she looks like she's transforming again. He asks if she's willing to talk to him right now, but Haito apologizes and tells him she has lost the will to keep going. She had deluded herself into thinking she needed to become strong so she could earn her father's approval, but the truth is that her father died in this very dojo, and she was the culprit. Jubei tells Haito that if she has really lost the will to fight, then she won't mind if she lops her head off, and Haito says that if it would make Jubei feel better, then she is free to do so. Toya tries to talk Jubei down because she can't seriously be thinking about killing Haito, but Jubei wastes no time and kicks Haito to the ground before raising her sword to finish her off. Back at the base, Minami has just delivered the message that Itsuki confirmed the existence of the seed of reincarnation, so they need to ramp up their efforts to find it. However, while Minami does believe what Itsuki said, he wonders how Itsuki managed to remember the encounter with the faceless man even though everyone else completely forgot their interactions with him. Itsuki explains that it's all thanks to the fact that he stabbed his hand, because the pain allowed him to remember what happened, but he only managed to get information about the existence of the seed, so he can only hope that someone else managed to get some useful information out of that man. Meanwhile, back in the dojo, Jubei is about to strike Haito down, but all of a sudden, Haito catches the blade and begins to get up. Jubei asks her why she's fighting back since she was the one who said she wanted to die, but Haito genuinely has no idea what's going on because she can't control her body right now, and a moment later, Haito gets possessed by the manifestation of her delusional thirst for power, forcing her to continue fighting even though she has given up. The possessed Haito gets back up to fight, but Jubei is completely unfazed by this and decides to go all out by using her second eye's ability, Blade's Edge Acuity. This ability raises Jubei's visual perception several times higher than usual, so when Haito throws 4 slashes at her, she is easily able to dodge every single one and dash past Haito while slashing her cheek. This pisses Haito off, so she launches 9 slashes next, but Jubei sees each and every one of those slashes coming, so she is easily able to block them head-on. Haito then attempts to use her Sword Spirit Lock technique to trap Jubei and freeze her in place, but with her heightened senses, she can see right through the technique and walks forward like nothing happened. Seeing Jubei completely bypass her technique infuriates Haito even more, so she begins charging up her infinite slash. Toya recalls how devastating this slash was when she used it last time, and he is worried that Jubei may not be able to handle this. But then, to Toya's surprise, Jubei actually manages to perfectly counter Haito's strike before she has a chance to unleash it. Jubei yells in anger at Haito and asks if this is really all she has left in the tank, because so far, all she's been doing is throwing out little tricks without any real swordsmanship behind them. She tells Haito she's going to show her what real swordsmanship looks like right now. The two of them lock swords, and Jubei begins to lecture Haito on how sloppy her guard is while perfectly countering each and every one of Haito's attacks. Haito then charges at Jubei in a fit of blind rage, but Jubei skillfully swipes away one of Haito's swords, and from there, Jubei is practically toying with Haito, because none of Haito's attacks are anywhere close to beating her, and it's all thanks to Jubei's eye. With her heightened senses, she is able to see every tiny movement Haito makes and use that information to predict her next move before she does it. Paired with Jubei's already exceptional sword skills, makes it impossible for someone who relies on brute strength like Haito to beat her. However, so far, Jubei hasn't been able to beat Haito because every time she's about to land a finishing blow, Haito just barely manages to evade at the last second. And it's not that Jubei is making any mistakes. Haido's raw reflexes are simply so fast that she is able to survive even though she's in a losing position. However, sooner or later, Jubei is sure she will be able to catch Haito in a position she can't escape from. But before that could happen, Jubei suddenly begins to cough up blood and falls to the ground. Toya is shocked and doesn't understand what happened since he's sure Haito didn't land any strikes on Jubei. But apparently, all the movement just now reopened Jubei's wounds from earlier. So she's in no condition to continue fighting as she is now. Haito seizes the opportunity and raises her sword to finish Jubei off. But at the last second, she stops short of Jubei's neck. Jubei doesn't understand why Haito didn't just finish her off, but Haito says she has no interest in killing an unarmed opponent, so she just tells Jubei and Toya to leave immediately. Toya rushes over to check on Jubei, but Jubei isn't satisfied yet, so she demands to know what Haito hopes to achieve with all this power she has been fighting for. However, all Haito says is that she will eventually find her purpose through battle, and it is at that moment that Jubei realizes that Haito is trapped in a never-ending pursuit of power. She now knows how to turn Haito back, but it's not something they can do now, so she tells Toya they should fall back for now. As they leave, Haito falls to the floor and breaks down in tears. When Jubei was defeated by Caesar, as he was carrying her back to Shang Yu's castle, he apologized for getting her caught up in all this. But he also said that what happened to Haito was a first-hand demonstration of the true nature of the petals, and that is why he said he needed Jubei's help to destroy all returners for good. Back in the present, Jubei's condition is still pretty bad, so Toya suggests they should probably head back to the base so they can get her treated, but Jubei refuses, saying they need to save Haito first. Toya understands that, but he doesn't think it will be possible for them to convince Haito to return as she is now, especially not with that black fog possessing her. Toya still doesn't even know what that thing was. Jubei explains that it was a manifestation of Haito's unending ambition for power created by the petals, and it was triggered by Haito's trauma. Strength is relative, so no matter how strong you become, as long as there is still someone left to fight against, you will be doomed to spiral down a road of perpetual dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction is likely why Haito is still an incomplete returner. She became a returner in the pursuit of power, but as a result of that power, she ended up gravely wounding and killing her father. Anyone would be an absolute mental wreck after something like that, so it makes sense that Haito ended up that way. But if they want to get her back to normal, then the only way they can do so is to get rid of the fog altogether. And to do that, Jubei says they will need to break Haito's will to fight altogether. And to do that, they need to beat her in a duel so they can talk to her afterward. Toya assumes Jubei is saying she will beat Haito in a duel, and then it will be up to Toya to convince her to come back. But Jubei corrects him and informs him that she isn't the one who is going to be fighting. Toya doesn't understand what she's trying to say, so she points out that, with the current condition her body is in, there's no way she'd be able to beat Haito in a drawn-out fight anytime soon. But she tells Toya there's no need to worry because she promises to train him enough that, in 3 days, he will be able to beat her. Toya doesn't doubt Jubei's skills as a teacher or a swordsman, but he tells her he doesn't think he's up to the task because, after all, the only things he has at his disposal are cheap tricks. And aside from that, he's just an ordinary dude, so he stands no chance of beating someone as strong as Haito. However, Jubei tells him he's forgetting about his right hand's ability to steal talents, and it just so happens that there's a talent right in front of him that's right for the taking. While Toya and Jubei begin the training arc, the others back at the base officially begin the operation to collect branches of reincarnation from rogue returners, and their first targets are the conquistadors. They've been launching attacks all across Central Africa just for the fun of it, so they are the perfect group to start with, and Iron Arm is the first to engage. He attacks Almagro, and Almagro's ability allows him to create weapons in proportion to the number of enemies he's facing. A talent like that makes Almagro strong enough to take on an entire army all by himself, but it's not great for one-on-one fights, so he ends up being beaten pretty easily by Iron Arm. The second conquistador steps in to help his teammate and activates his talent, summoning dozens of wolves to attack on his command. But just then, the returner Norton, on the defense force's side, activates his ability, drawing the complete attention of the wolves and basically rendering the second conquistador's power completely useless. While watching the battle unfold from the cliffside, Ayn asks the rest of the returners on the team if they aren't going to jump in to help. However, they admit that their abilities aren't really suited for combat, so they are pretty much useless in this setting, but they don't think it's going to be a problem since the others should be more than strong enough to win the fight. They may be right about that, but Ayn is still a little frustrated because she knows for a fact that, with her talent, she could have taken all of them down by now if she had been allowed to fight. But Newman too insisted that she let the others handle this alone since she wanted to use this as an opportunity to see what the returners on their team could do, and by the looks of things, they should be wrapping things up pretty soon. The conquistadors have been beaten into a corner, and they now realize that there is no way they can win in a situation like this, so two of them begin planning to retreat. But before they can do so, the third one suddenly pulls out a gun and shoots them in the back. The others see this and wonder what's going on since they weren't expecting the conquistadors to start fighting amongst themselves. But it turns out that it was part of a ritual for Cortez to activate his talent. And now that the conditions have been met, a massive amount of energy begins gathering around him. But there's no way Aang is just going to sit there and watch that happen, so she teleports in beside Cortez and teleports out with his head, killing him instantly. Minami is really impressed with how quickly Aang was able to take out the conquistadors, and he's about to shut down the recording since it looks like they are done here. But Itsuki says they should keep rolling since he gets the feeling that something is about to happen. Meanwhile, over in the Forest of Greats, since Nightingale is in hibernation, most of the returners she has under her control are currently inactive. But Einstein and Tesla were never under Nightingale's control to begin with, so they have come up with a plan to use Newman's powers at full capacity in order to track down Ein. And once they get the coordinates they are after, Einstein opens a portal straight to Aang. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Ein is spacing out a little because, with the current condition of her body, teleporting is taking quite the toll on her. Her arm is even starting to go numb as a result of the strain, and the others notice that she seems a bit under the weather, so they ask her if she's alright. Ein tells them she's perfectly fine, so there's no need to worry about her. She then takes out her phone so she can report back to Itsuki, but all of a sudden, Einstein appears beside her, and Ein is shaken because Einstein is clearly a massive threat. She immediately tries to take Einstein out by teleporting, but Einstein already knows how Ein's powers work, so she steps closer into Ein's teleportation range to avoid being damaged. Ein's ability can only harm people when they get caught in the boundary of the teleportation space, so once you know the trick, it's pretty easy to avoid. Einstein is honestly pissed that Ein dares to call herself Einstein when all she has are those simple tricks, but Ein still has no idea who Einstein is, so Einstein apologizes because she forgot to introduce herself. She tells Ein that her name is Albert Einstein and that she came along with Newton. Aang is stunned when she sees Newton, but Newton is clearly still being mind-controlled since the first thing he does is grab Aang's tongue to prevent her from teleporting away. Ein bites his fingers and yells at Newton to snap out of it, but Newton raises his fists, preparing to knock her out. Ein looks at him with tears in her eyes and pleads for him to come back to her, and after seeing that look on her face, Newton starts punching himself instead. Which means the real Newton is definitely still in there somewhere, and Ein can't bear to see him hurt himself, so she tries to stop him. Einstein thinks this is all very amusing, but all of a sudden, Iron Arm comes charging at her. But Einstein just teleports him out of the way and teleports herself into the sky alongside Newton, who is now holding Ein. Ein is extremely confused since she has no idea how Einstein just used teleportation. She asks her again who she is, and Einstein reiterates that she is the one and only Albert Einstein. Ein says that's not possible because she is Albert Einstein, and there can't be two Einsteins. But Einstein tells her that's not important right now since she just came here to talk. She explains that, as they know, the Forest of Greats possesses the greatest fighting force on the planet right now, and everyone in the Forest of Greats is currently under the control of Nightingale, with the exception of Einstein and Tesla. And right now, since Nightingale is asleep, most of those returners are dormant, so she is extremely vulnerable. That means this would be the perfect opportunity for humanity to strike back, but of course, they don't know where Nightingale is. So Einstein offers Ein a deal. She says she's willing to tell Ein where she can find Nightingale, but only on the condition that Ein can successfully land a blow on her, and if she fails, then Einstein is going to wipe out everyone here. Albert lands right next to the others, and they have no idea what's going on. But first of all, Iron Arm demands that Albert release Ein at once. Ein is being held down by Newton, and because of his gravitational field, he is warping the space around her, so she can't get a read on her exact coordinates to teleport away. She wants to warn the others that they have no hope of beating Albert and that they should run away, but all of a sudden, Albert fires a blast at one of them and provokes Iron Arm into attacking. Iron Arm swings at her wildly, but Albert effortlessly dodges every single one of his moves. However, Iron Arm's attack had only been a distraction to try and get Albert in one place long enough for the others to launch a surprise attack, and before Albert knows it, there's a giant metal block heading right for her. Unfortunately, even with the sneak attack, Albert still manages to dodge in time, and Iron Arm is starting to think that her ability to float like a leaf in the wind is part of her talent. But Ein can tell that Albert's flight right now is all thanks to one of Newton's gravitational apples. However, she has no idea what Albert's true talent really is. Iron Arm refuses to give up, so he asks the others to lend him a hand so they can launch coordinated strikes against Albert. They then proceed to build a metal wall and slice it into pieces before Iron Arm punches those pieces toward Albert, and they assume that there's no way she'd be able to dodge such a violent barrage. But despite their best efforts, Albert is still fine and in one piece, floating above them. She's a little disappointed that this is the best they could come up with, so she's about to finish them off with a bolt of lightning. But all of a sudden, that bolt of lightning changes direction and curves to the left. This was the effect of Norton's power, which allows him to redirect attacks toward himself. But Albert asks him if he's sure he wants to do that, since redirecting attacks like that will bring him much closer to death. She then fires a blast directly at Norton, but before it can hit him, Mobius steps in front of him and dissipates the charge. Albert admits that their defensive formation certainly is formidable since Norton attracts the attacks toward himself and Mobius neutralizes them before he gets hurt, but she has already figured out how to get around it, so she fires missiles at them. Mobius neutralizes the missiles as expected, but after that, they explode. And since Mobius wasn't expecting it, he can't neutralize the explosion in time, leaving both him and Norton severely injured. Iron Arm runs over to Mobius to check on him, but Albert blasts a hole through his arm and shoulder to take him out. She is certain that that amount of damage would be enough to take Iron Arm down, but to her surprise, he is still standing. She then drives a sword into his throat in an attempt to make sure he stays down, but he casually pulls the sword out, and all of a sudden, his wounds begin to heal. However, not without a cost, because in the back, Henri begins coughing as the wound Iron Arm suffered is transferred to him instead. Albert immediately notices this and deduces that Henri's healing power must work by transferring wounds to himself. But the fact that he doesn't die after transferring such a fatal wound means he can't die from the transferred wounds, no matter how painful they may be. She'd love to test the limits of Henri's ability, but it would be much simpler to simply take out the healer first. So she decides to target him, and after Henri goes down, the rest soon follow. Ein is horrified to see all the others be obliterated so easily, and now that they have been taken care of, Albert focuses all her attention on Ein because she's dead set on proving that she is the one and only Einstein. Itsuki has been watching all this happen from the sidelines, and Minami thinks the situation is looking pretty bad, so he asks Itsuki to order an immediate retreat, but Itsuki says there's no need for that. He points out that even though Albert took down everyone on the returner team, they haven't turned into petals yet, so she must have intentionally avoided killing them. And that must mean her goal here isn't to kill anyone, so there might be room to negotiate a ceasefire with her. Back on the battlefield, Albert orders Newton to crush Ein's replacement leg, and because it was designed to interface with Ein's nervous system, she feels every bit of the pain from it. However, she knows Newton is being forced to do this against his will, and it must be eating away at him inside, so she crawls over to him and tells him she's fine. Albert is annoyed that Ein is still keeping a brave face despite all the pain, so she orders Newton to destroy her arm next. However, Newton begins resisting and refuses to do so. Just then, Itsuki and his team throw a bunch of smoke grenades onto the field, and immediately after, Itsuki rushes in and begins pelting Albert with punches. Newton shields her, but she is starting to panic because she can't see anything right now, so she orders Newton to clear away the smoke. He uses one of his gravity fields to do so, but as soon as he does, Itsuki and his squad open fire on them. Now that Albert can see again, she creates a portal to block all the bullets and orders Newton to crush those guys. But before he can throw the apple, a sniper from the cliff destroys it, and immediately after that, they hit Albert with another round of smoke grenades. With Albert distracted again, the soldiers begin evacuating Ein and the others. Itsuki is a little disappointed since he was hoping they'd be able to take her out with that barrage, but he should have guessed that a great class returner wouldn't go down so easily. Just then, Minami yells at Itsuki over the comms and asks him what he thinks he's doing since he said he wanted to negotiate a ceasefire with Albert, but Itsuki says it's a little late to negotiate now since Albert looks pretty pissed right now. Itsuki's men ask him for permission to engage so they can keep Albert busy until she calms down. After all, this will be the perfect opportunity to test out what these branch-powered suits can do against a great class returner. Itsuki tells them to go ahead, but he also reminds them that they need to be careful so they don't get themselves killed. Meanwhile, over on Toya and Jubei's end, it has been 3 days since they found Haido, and Jubei has spent these past 3 days doing everything she can to prepare Toya for the duel. He's still a long way off from being considered a proper swordsman, but as long as he remembers the principles of patience and deception that Jubei taught him, he should be fine. She also tells Toya she has a gift for him because she found an old hairy coat lying around the dojo, so she fixed it up for him to wear so he'd look the part. She also mentions that she left a little note for him in the pocket of the coat, and she says she wants him to read it after the duel is over. She then hands him her sword, but Toya notices that she's hesitating to let go, so he asks her if something is wrong. In response, Jubei asks him if he's really sure he doesn't want to take her swordsmanship skills for himself since they would be really helpful in a battle against Haido. But Toya says he already took Jubei's acute vision talent, and that's more than enough for him. Jubei can tell that Toya wants to face Haito with his own strength, and she can respect that about him, but she has to admit that she was surprised when he made that decision. She initially thought Toya was looking down on her sword style, but Toya explained to her that that wasn't the problem. From what he saw during Jubei's fight earlier, her sword style uses several smooth transitions between attacks to fight, and it isn't copied from any of the main sword styles. So Toya assumes she must have come up with it on her own. Jubei admits that he's right. When she became a returner, her only talent was her eyes, but she used that keen vision to develop her fighting style as an amalgamation of both offense and defense, and in all honesty, without the special eyes, it would be impossible for even the most experienced swordsman to develop a technique as refined as hers. Which is exactly why, although Toya's ability would allow him to steal Jubei's skills, he refuses to do so because he doesn't want to take something that Jubei worked hard to develop on her own. Now that Jubei thinks about it, she recalls hearing that Toya refused to take Shang Yu's talent as well despite his prevailing belief that the ends justify the means. And she's not exactly sure whether he had a fateful encounter or if he has been this way from the start, but regardless, she admires the kind of person he is. And she is certain that if anyone is going to be able to get through to Haido, then it'd be him. Once they arrive at the dojo, they find Haido sitting in the middle of the room, and she dismissively tells Toya that this is an arena of death, and it is no place for an unarmed person. Toya then shows her his sword and says he is here to challenge her to a duel, and this gets Haido's attention. Toya tells her that if he wins, he wants her to hear him out, but Haido reminds him this is a duel to the death, and chatting afterward isn't an option because defeat means certain death. They both draw their weapons after that, and Toya activates the acute vision he got from Jubei before getting into his stance to use his original self-taught fighting style. Toya and Haido then clash with neither taking any damage, but after that, Toya sheathes his blade, which leaves Haido extremely confused. He then arrogantly tells her that she isn't worth him drawing his blade because she is nowhere near strong enough, and Haido takes great offense to this, which was all part of the plan from the start. Before the duel, Jubei told Toya that when he gets the chance to, he should sheath his sword against Haito to provoke her. Toya didn't think that sounded like a good idea, but Jubei reminded him that his goal here wasn't to kill Haito, so his best bet at succeeding is to drag the fight out, evade Haito's onslaught, and wait for an opening to seize victory. Toya still didn't understand what any of this had to do with him sheathing his sword, so Jubei explained that having his sword at the ready would invite his opponent to clash with him, which over time would gradually put a lot of strain on Toya's body, and since he isn't trying to cut Haito down, there's no sense in him wasting all that energy. Therefore, sheathing his sword will allow him to conserve energy while forcing Haito to waste energy attacking him. But Jubei reminds Toya that he needs to provoke Haito for this to work because they need to get her so riled up that she doesn't catch wind of their plan. She tells Toya that he should only draw his sword when Haito starts using her techniques, but there's no need to worry about getting hit by her because, with Jubei's acute vision, he should be able to predict all of Haito's moves. Sure enough, no matter how much Haito strikes at Toya, he is consistently able to dodge her, all while throwing in snide remarks to provoke Haito even more. He can easily distinguish Haito's feints from her real death blows, and as long as he keeps moving, he is sure he will be able to outlast Haito. But just then, Haito gets into the stance for one of her techniques, and Toya can tell what's coming, so as she unleashes her 6-hued slash, he braces himself and blocks it with his sword. Haito is surprised that Toya actually managed to block that, so she decides to step it up by moving on to an 8-hued slash, but Toya blocks that as well. Haito then unleashes her infinite death stroke, and she is fully convinced that this will be an instant win, but Toya manages to cut through this as well. Haito then uses her spirit lock technique in an attempt to keep Toya frozen in place, but to her utter shock, Toya reaches through the sword intent like it's nothing. This startles Haito since the spirit lock is meant to impose the fear of death on a target to make them hesitate, but it turns out that is part of Toya's training over the past 3 days. Jubei told him that he would need to become desensitized to death so he wouldn't be affected by Haito's spirit lock technique, and to do that, she would have to kill him over and over. Several deaths in, Toya was lying on the ground, vomiting from all the pain he had experienced, and due to the repeated use of the immortality talent, his reincarnation ended and he returned to normal. If this were to happen during his battle with Haito, it would be certain death, so Jubei warned Toya that he wouldn't be able to rely on immortality too much in battle. She then asked him if he was sure he wanted to go through all this pain just to save Haito, and Toya remained fully motivated to see this through until the end, no matter how hard it might be. He continues his fight with Haito, but midway through, a floorboard collapses beneath his feet, and Haito takes advantage of the opportunity to slash at Toya again, and this time, her slash actually connects. However, to Haito's shock, a moment later, Toya gets up like nothing happened. She doesn't understand how Toya could be standing after such a strike, and Toya doesn't want to let her find out about his immortality, so he gaslights her into thinking her attack missed, but internally, he's starting to panic a little because he was forced to use immortality, and if that happens a few more times, he's going to revert to normal. He can't let that happen, so he steals his resolve and refocuses himself because he won't give up until he saves Haito.